Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If this side. Today we will be seeing what if Vigilante Deku hits his breaking point. Now before we move ahead with the fic, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Izuku felt terrible. 1. He was back here and that was great. 2. How could he somehow feel as healthy as a horse and like death incarnate at the same time? 3. He was still tired. How is that fair after he was just dead and literally doing nothing? Rigged. And lost TLY, he was PSS. When he went under, he didn't see his mom. He kept on going through his memories and reliving some of the worst moments of his life. At SCK, he saw a lot of Kaken and each time he hated him more. But it wasn't all hate. One of the memories he kept on going back to was when they were both children and Izuku insisted on being his friend and following him around no matter how many times he pushed him down. Izuku couldn't take a hint apparently. Those feelings of unwavering loyalty and admiration followed him throughout middle school. And that was probably why he let them treat him like that. And don't even get him started on all of the verbal, mental, and emotional abuse he endured every single day. He was a child, a bright-eyed and naive child who saw the best in everyone and refused to acknowledge the bad. No matter what Kaken put him through, he still stuck around. He somehow convinced himself that it was his fault that he was treated that was, but what could he have possibly done to be treated like that? And nobody did a thing. Izuku couldn't see it back then. He was too nice, too forgiving. But that Izuku was gone. They say that if you hear something enough you start to believe it even if you know it's not true. Well, now Izuku knew the truth. He could see it clearly. His bullies were wrong. And he wasn't going to let that fear run his life anymore. He continued to cough and SCK in air as his body went back to actively keeping him alive. It was annoying how it had to relearn how to work every time he died. But what can you do? Ugh, I hate this stupid freaking quirk. He yelled in between coughs. Once he was finally able to breathe properly and didn't feel like he would pass out if he tried to stand, he pushed himself to his feet and froze. Eraserhead and someone else were standing on the opposite of the table he had been on staring at him like he was a ghost. Although, to them, he probably was. Hey Eraser. The hero blinked and didn't make any attempt to close his mouth that was practically on the ground. This was going to be such a pain. You might want to close your mouth, you'll catch flies. Eraser slowly obeyed and scrutinized every inch of Izuku. It was as if he couldn't believe what was right in front of him. He started but couldn't seem to gather his thoughts enough to form a coherent sentence. That was to be expected, he supposed. You were dead. I saw you die. You did. Sorry about that, I try to not be a burden on anyone. But sometimes it's inevitable and you died. I held your body and checked for a pulse. You hadn't taken a single breath in hours. How are you alive? Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. It's kinda a long story, but short version is that I can't die apparently. The man standing beside Eraserhead hadn't said a thing so far, just gawked at Izuku and his conversation with Eraser, but something that he said must have jump-started his brain. I'm sorry apparently. You mean that this is a new thing for you, not dying? Yeah. The first time didn't exactly work, and I thought that maybe it had been long enough but… Wait, Eraser interrupted Izuku's rant, which was probably a good thing. They didn't need to know about all of that. The last time didn't work. Were you trying to kill yourself? Maybe this wasn't the best idea. The more they talked, the worse it seemed to get, and the angrier Eraser got. The three of them stood in silence for a few seconds as Izuku refused to meet either of the adults' scrutinizing eyes. It was Eraser who broke the tense silence. Kid, answer the question. His voice was low and dark. It wasn't strong to figure out that he was PSS, but about what? There were honestly so many possibilities Izuku just didn't even try to guess. False. The other guy finally spoke up again. His face was difficult to read, but he was clearly confused and upset. Dude, what the heck? Izuku couldn't believe the guy sold him out like that. Snitch. Oh my god. Eraser turned away and began to pace back and forth, rubbing his temples and mumbling to himself. Is that why you were running across the roof so recklessly? Because you were trying to kill yourself. Recklessly. Izuku didn't think he was being too reckless, but he was probably a bad judge considering his regard for his life was less than zero. No, I was doing it because it's fun and I felt good while doing it. He paused, debating whether or not to tell them the complete truth or not. The other guy was like a bloodhound when it came to lies apparently, so he should just say it before he went fishing. And if I happen to slip and die, then what's the harm? Oh my, do you hear yourself? What's the harm? You could have been killed, or seriously injured, and that's a pretty big deal. He stared at Izuku with unbelieving eyes, before something else flashed in them. Wait, is that why you didn't care the other night? You're going to have to be more specific. The other night, when those guys held a gun against your head, you didn't even flinch. This is why, because you just don't care. Eraser scoffed at Izuku's nonchalantness and went back to pacing as the other guy looked like he was trying to process everything they were saying, and was losing. You see, Tsuki, do you see what a pain this problem child is? The other man cleared his throat and looked at Izuku warily, as if not knowing what to do in this situation. I'm not sure if you should use the words pain and problem to describe him, Shouta. It seems rather harsh. Oh, bite me. Eraser stayed on the other side of the room mumbling angrily to himself while the other man stepped towards Izuku. I'm sorry about him. My name is Naomasa Tsukuchi. I'm a detective on the police force and an old friend of Eraserhead. You must be Serpentine. He extended his hand with a small smile, one that could make even the most skeptical person comfortable. Izuku shook the detective's hand gingerly, a little bit uncomfortable with having someone with the police around. That's what they call me. Well, it's very nice to meet you, Serpentine. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions, just about tonight and what exactly happened? There was that smile again, but Izuku knew better. The name Tsukuchi sounded familiar somehow. Maybe someone in the hero industry that he came across once, but he couldn't remember what his quirk was. It put him on edge. Izuku resorted to shrugging rather than answering out loud and pulled a metal stool to sit on while the detective made himself comfortable leaning against the autopsy table. All right, he pulled out a small notebook from the pocket of his coat and flipped it open. Don't worry, I'm just taking notes to make sure I remember everything. You don't need to worry about getting in trouble or anything. He must have seen how Izuku reacted to his actions. Oh, okay. So, can you tell me what happened tonight, maybe a little bit earlier? This was going to be tricky. Should Izuku lie about doing vigilante work? Did it even really count as vigilante work? And did he even want to talk about what happened? Not really, but he didn't exactly have a choice. Well, I was getting in some exercise and... You were roof hopping, weren't you? Eraser interrupted from across the room and Izuku glared at him slightly. Anyway, so I was roof hopping and then I heard a disturbance and decided to check it out. Is this a frequent activity you do? Roof hopping, I mean. Over the past couple of months, I've been working on my speed and coordination. Kinda true, but not the whole truth. The detective hummed as he wrote something in his notebook. And what happened when you went to check out the disturbance? Oh, nothing really. Tsukuchi and Eraserhead looked at each other, thinking the same thing. Eraserhead had to clean up after Serpentine and reported about 4 different takedowns of different criminals in the same area. Right? And have you done that before? Done what? Gotten involved in a fight or something of the sort? The detective looked up at Izuku sharply as if to dare him to lie. The boy rubbed the back of his neck and looked away, maybe a few times. More writing, and Eraserhead decided to come and join the conversation, not taking his eyes off of Izuku, who noticed just how different he was reacting to his stare. Just a week ago he would have crumbled at the thought of making him angry, but now he just couldn't find it in himself to care. Interesting. And what about tonight? Tell us what exactly happened when you jumped. Izuku really didn't want to do this. He was already in a crappy mood and felt like he could sleep for the next century. So being questioned on his decision to kill himself didn't sound very pleasing at the moment, or ever. You know, I had some downtime and thought I might as well just... Instead of finishing his sentence, the boy just made a face and left the rest for the two of them to figure out. So, it was just a spur-of-the-moment decision. Not really, well, guess there was no avoiding this. I had decided earlier that I was going to, I just didn't know exactly when. That's a very big decision. Do you think it was the right one? The detective looked at him with sad eyes, while Eraser just continued to stare and analyze his words and expressions. Again, Izuku shrugged, which resulted in Eraserhead scoffing and getting elbowed in the ribs by Tsukuchi. I mean, sure, the first time was a big deal, but I kinda figured it wouldn't work again. I was just testing it, really. Testing ... if you could die. Yes. Hold on, Eraser spoke up, not looking happy, but to be fair, he never really did. You keep on saying last time, so this wasn't your first attempt. Izuku shook his head, feeling uncomfortable with the expression the hero now wore. It was one he hadn't seen yet on him, but was all too familiar with. Kid, don't. Izuku got off of the stool and began to walk towards the door. I really need to be getting home and I'd rather not have this conversation with you guys. So Eraser, I'll see you later in Detective. Honestly, he hoped that he would never see him again. But he couldn't just say that, so he simply nodded to him and left, leaving the two of them speechless for the second time that night. What have we gotten ourselves into, Tsuki? I blame you. Oh, whatever. Eraser rolled his eyes and shoved his friend, who began laughing despite the somber mood. Just like the kid had said, Eraser did see him soon after that night. He didn't see him the day after, but he couldn't really fault him. Dying had to be traumatic, not to mention it being an attempted suicide. The thought of the kid who was always so bright-eyed feeling like that was the only option made Shouta nauseous. He had been there, he had dwelt with those thoughts and feelings, especially after that happened, but he had people to help pull him out of that place. From what he got from the kid, he didn't have that. So Shouta would just have to be that until he did. Seeing the kid's fluffy hair fly in the wind as he jumped from building to building felt like a breath of fresh air. Finding the kid dead like that ... it had hurt. And Shouta didn't want to find him like that ever again. When he finally caught up and the two of them started talking and joking like before, something felt off. Serpentine wasn't stuttering or getting furred by Eraser's presence, which was a good thing, but it makes him wonder why the sudden change. It was as if his whole attitude changed. He seemed more confident, not as afraid or insecure. He would sass Eraser and joke around and wouldn't flinch at his glare or immediately apologize for being a burden or annoying. All things that needed to be fixed, but why was it so different now? Shouta wanted to ask with every fiber of his being, but he knew if he did the kid would just run away. and he didn't want to lose him again. Not even for a second. Oh god, I really am a dad, aren't I? Wow, you're so amazing, Kaken. I hope that when I get my quirk it's as cool as yours. You're going to be the best hero. And I'll always be there right beside you. Katsuki woke up feeling the streams of tears on his cheeks immediately. Every morning it was like this. Ever since the nerd ... he's been having the same kind of dreams that were centered around his childhood friend. Some were just sad like tonight, reminders of how good and pure the boy was before everything. But some nights Katsuki wasn't so lucky. For a solid month after the accident, the only dream he had was of him jumping. He would see the things leading up to it, and every time he closed his eyes all he saw was Izuku broken and lifeless. After a while he stopped waking up screaming and just resorted to silently sobbing most nights. The thoughts haunted him constantly. Just shut up, Deku. No one wants to be friends with a useless loser like you. You'll never be as good as me, Deku. It's just not possible with how pathetic you are. You're nothing and always will be. Why don't you just do all of us a favor and take the swan dive so that we don't have to deal with your sit anymore? Why did I have to say that to him? Why did I have to be such a DCK and destroy the one good thing in my life? I really am pathetic. Sitting here feeling sorry for myself when Izuku's dead. And it's my fault. Katsuki knew that it was nowhere near time to get up yet, but if he went back to sleep then he'd just have the same dreams or nightmares. So, he decided to go ahead and get up and take a shower so that he wasn't so gross and sweaty. The water was cold, but not too much so. He didn't want to catch a cold. Not with the UA entrance exams being so close. That's also something that changed after everything. Katsuki refuses to take anything but cold showers or eat or drink anything that's hot. His quirk relies on the sweat that his body produces, and so he decided that he just wouldn't sweat. It wasn't working out too well for him so far, but he just couldn't bring himself to use his quirk unless it was absolutely necessary. It just brought back memories of him tormenting and abusing Izuku, and he got enough of that in his head. He didn't need any more reminders. Once he was finished in the shower, he started working on some of his schoolwork. He was already way ahead of everyone else because that was one of the things he turned to when he thought too much. It helped distract him, at least for a bit. He decided that he was still going to try to be a hero, but he didn't have to be the best anymore. It was that ambition that drove him to treat everyone around him like dirt, and Katsuki didn't want to be that person anymore. He wanted to be someone that Izuku could be proud of. He wanted to be the Kaken that he always saw despite everything. Katsuki was going to do better. It wasn't going to make up for the past, and he wasn't trying to. He just couldn't be that way, he wouldn't. He refused to be someone who tore people down and drove them to kill themselves. He wanted to be better. He wanted to be like Izuku. Someone soft and kind and light and good. Katsuki wasn't good. He might never be able to be, but that didn't mean that he couldn't try. For Izuku, Katsuki, you better make it in. Mitsuki called as her son tried his best to get through the living room as quietly as possible. The boy cursed under his breath and turned to where his mother was peeking her head out of the kitchen. Yeah, Mom, of course I'll make it in. I am the best after all. The words were empty. They held absolutely no conviction or truth in them. Katsuki knew he wasn't the best and he wasn't trying to be anymore. But he knew that if he admitted that to his mom then she'd have a meltdown. For as long as he can remember it's always been about winning, about being the best, about cutting down those beneath you and working your way to the top. Right when Katsuki got his quirk was when it really got bad. He had always been scolded and compared to Izuku by his mother. She would yell about how he was such a screw-up and that he was horrible because he wasn't as nice or polite as the other boy. And then when it was announced that Izuku was quirkless, anytime the Midoriyas were brought up it was always how it was such a tragedy that their son was a failure. And how sorry she felt for Inko because she had to deal with the humiliation of giving BRTH and raising someone so weak. He was just a kid. They were both just kids who had big dreams, but completely different destinies. That's what I want to hear. Now go and show all of those extras who's going to be number one. Yes, ma'am. Katsuki was thankful for the short conversation. When his dad wasn't around, their interaction tended to be a bit more intense without him as a buffer for her. Katsuki didn't know if he knew about everything, about what Mom would always say, but he had never been one to speak up anyway, so it didn't really matter. He had to take the bus to get to UA. It was a quiet ride and Katsuki found himself people watching, looking at each face and trying to figure out what their quirks might be and if they had ever been hurt because of them. It was a habit he had picked up from Izuku. When they were younger, he would always analyze everyone around him, and as much as Katsuki didn't want it to, it rubbed off on him. He was thankful for it now though, because it helped him see just how much of a DCK he and the people he hung out with were. The place was humongous. Yeah, UA was supposed to be the best and most prestigious hero school in the country, but wow. It was actually very intimidating. Past Katsuki would have just scoffed and taken it as a challenge to be better and live up to the school, but things were different now. It was an honor for him to be here. After all ... not everyone could be. The written exam was a breeze. Guess all those early mornings studying instead of sleeping really paid off. And after President Mike was finished with introducing them and explaining how the physical exam was going to work, the room was split into two groups that went to their respective exam sites. Katsuki was surprised by how easily he recognized some of the pro heroes that were around. Another thing he picked up from Izuku, he supposed. Alright, so the objective of the physical exam was to destroy as many robots as possible. and rack up the most points. It seemed easy enough, but Katsuki cringed at the thought of using his quirk so much and around so many people who could get caught in the middle of it. Oh wow, that's definitely different. If only Mom could hear his thoughts, she'd probably explode with anger. A loud buzzer sounded, and President Mike's voice announced the start of the exam. It was chaos. People were destroying bots left and right, and Katsuki was beginning to get overwhelmed. No, focus. You have to pass, do it for Izuku. For Izuku. Right. It was almost child's play taking down the robots. The biggest obstacle was actually controlling the blasts, and trying his best to protect everyone around him. Shrapnel had left multiple cuts and bruises on Katsuki's arms that were exposed by his tank top, but at least it was him and not the other kids. They didn't need to be hurt by his quirk even if it wasn't directly. He couldn't do that anymore. He lost count of how many times an oblivious participant thanked him once they figured out what had happened, but that really didn't matter. He wasn't looking for praise, he just didn't want to hurt anyone. Ever again. The exam was almost over when a loud siren was blowing out Katsuki's eardrums and making it strong for him to stay on his feet. No one knew what was going on, but he suspected that it had something to do with those 0-pointers that President Mike warned them about. He said to avoid them. All right, easy enough. Oh, never mind. Robots that were taller than the buildings in the fake city rounded the corner and began to make the ground shake as they moved towards them. I feel like that's a lot more than just an insignificant robot that we should avoid. What, are they trying to kill us? The examines around Katsuki began to run away in terror, some screaming and some managing to keep their cool while looking at the 5-story tall death robots that were coming right at them. Running seemed like a good idea, actually probably the only idea that didn't end up with him steamrolled on the ground. Katsuki started running while still looking back at the 0-pointers, actually looking to see if anyone was still near them, when he heard someone scream for help. He searched around for who could have called out and quickly found where a girl looked to be trapped under some rubble that fell when one of the robots ran into a building. And the robots were about to run her over. UA wouldn't let that happen, right? They wouldn't let an innocent girl get injured over something like an exam. But this was a hero school, and they were supposed to be training to deal with real villains who would be trying to kill them. There's no telling what the school might do to prepare them for a life as dangerous as being a hero. Oh hell. Without a second thought, Katsuki was off towards the trapped girl as people around him yelled at him to stop and to run back. Did they not see that she needed help? Maybe they did, it didn't look like any of them were going to try to help her. Guess it was up to him then. Hey, you're good. You're good, you're going to be fine. Can you move? The girl tried to wiggle out from under the rubble but stopped when she knew that she wouldn't be able to. No, and my quirk is at its limit. What's your quirk? 0 gravity. I can take away the gravity of anything that I touch with all 5 fingers. Katsuki tried to lift one of the larger pieces of building off of her but was unsuccessful. Okay, now what? What would Izuku do? He looked at the approaching robots and guessed that it'd be maybe 10 seconds until they were right on top of them. Okay. He looked around for something that he could maybe use as a lever to help lift the rubble. Nothing, just a bunch of rocks and pipes. Katsuki found a pipe that looked sturdy enough and ran back to where the girl was. Okay, I need you to try and help me. I know that you're at your limit, but please just try to help lift this. She nodded, determination filling her expression as she took a deep breath in, and the two nodded at each other. The girl touched the piece of rubble with both of her hands and Katsuki got the pipe under it and began to push down on the other side. Slowly the chunk began to lift and the boy found himself smiling while the girl looked like she was about to throw up, but kept on pushing. Come on, calm on. Just a little bit more, yes. Now, move now. The girl quickly pulled herself out from under the chunk of building and rolled on her back as Katsuki finally dropped it and let out a breath. I can't believe that actually worked. Oh no. The girl looked above Katsuki and gasped sharply. What? Oh right, the robots. Kinda forgot about those. Katsuki got to his feet and groaned as he wrung out his hands. This was going to hurt. You're always too strong on these children. I know that they're trying to be heroes, but honestly, this one almost got crushed. And this one badly damaged his wrists due to overusing his quirk. If he's not careful, then he could face serious consequences for doing so. Not to mention the hearing damage that I had to repair. Shout aside as he listened to Recovery Girl scold him yet again, and it wasn't even his fault this time. Hearing and sight are tricky to work with, I know. You've told me this before. Multiple times actually. He mumbled the last part under his breath and earned a glare from the woman. Absolutely right. Maybe try SWCH things up this year, huh, Racer? Let's have a bet to see how long your class can go without a visit to see me. You know that I refuse to gamble with you. Besides ... you'd win. Recovery Girl's mouth pulled into a smirk as she went back to treat the two examinees who got the most injured this year, Katsuki Bakugo and Achako Uraraka. As much as Shouta hated to admit it, she was right. The students, especially the Hero Course students, tended to spend more time in the infirmary than they did out of it, and that was a problem. Of course, that was simple a part of being a hero. Hero work is dangerous and should not be treated as any less. But maybe something he would really focus on this year is self-preservation. God knows they all need it. And it might just so happen that he's still shaken up by what happened with Serpentine and is going to take it out on his official problem children. Speaking of which, what was he going to do with these two? What if they actually ended up in his class and he had to deal with them and whatever it was that happened today? Shouta didn't want to think about it. He had monitored the exam with the rest of the teachers, and it was safe to say that these two made quite the impression on everyone. No one expected the kid with the explosion quirk to be so gentle and protective of those around him. He actively blocked them from any possible debris or such that his explosions might throw around. It was interesting, and absolutely no surprise that he got the highest amount of rescue points even before the 0-pointers showed up. Uraraka was a surprise as well. Just looking at her, you'd never expect the girl to be so tough and determined. But she tore through the exam while still being kind to those around her and helping when she could. If Shouta didn't know any better, he might say that he had hoped for this year's litter of applicants. If the rest of the kids in his class were like these two, then this year was sure to be an interesting one. As he continued to think about some of the other applicants and his future class, his mind couldn't help but wander to Serpentine. He didn't actually know how old the kid was, but he was young. Right around the age of the rest of the students here actually. Shouta wondered if the kid would do well in this exam. It was geared more towards physical quirks, and from what he witnessed the other night, he thought that it was safe to say that his quirk wasn't the offensive type. Maybe that was why he was so against getting his license when Shouta brought it up. Being unkillable wasn't a very flashy quirk, and kids don't usually praise that sort of thing. Deeper and deeper his thoughts went, and he found himself wondering if the kid had ever been bullied, and that was why he seemed so meek when they first met. It would make sense, but then why had he 180'd so suddenly? The possibility of Serpentine being bullied in the past makes Shouta angry for some reason. It was irrational, he barely knew the kid. So then why was he being so protective? Why don't you just admit that you're a dad and go see your child? Tsukuchi loved to tease him with that kind of thing. But Eraser didn't agree. He wasn't a dad. He was a teacher and an underground pro hero, neither of which he acted very happy doing. He was supposed to be the cold-hearted and strict teacher and then mysterious hero. What about that was parental? Sure, he cared for the kid to a degree. But that didn't make him a father. Right. Ugh. Shouta hated thinking about this because it always confused him, and he didn't like not being in the know. He pushed all of it to the back of his mind and cordoned it off in hopes that he wouldn't have to deal with it again anytime soon. But that was probably too tall of an order when he was friends with Tsukuchi. Maybe he should get better friends. Nah, it was strong enough to get the ones he had, and beggars can't be choosers. He would never admit it, but Shouta was thankful for the people in his life and wouldn't trade them for the world. But he couldn't ruin his reputation by saying something like that. Izuku's mood was a little bit more irritable than usual, and it was very obvious. He didn't mean to be, but he had been a little bit more rough with the guys he had taken down tonight. It was hilarious when he realized what had happened, what he had done, and immediately began to apologize profusely to the criminal who was tied up on the ground just barely conscious. He knew exactly why he was in a bad mood. Izuku decided to head out just a bit earlier than usual today so that he could grab dinner when he caught glimpse of Kaken walking home. Bakugo was quiet and somber looking as he made his way to their apartment building, looking a bit worse for wear. He had bandages all up his arms and one of them was in a sling, and he also had a few more injuries around his body that looked almost healed. Izuku wondered what could have happened, until he remembered what today was. The UA entrance exam. He must have been just getting back. What must he have done to get those injuries? And he didn't look happy, so was it possible that Katsuki Bakugo actually failed? No, that was impossible. Everyone knew that Kaken was going to be a hero, the best hero. But was that really the case? Izuku realized just how messed up his behavior had been all of these years, and he knew that that wasn't how a hero was supposed to act. Heroes protected people, they lifted them up and encouraged them. Although that doesn't really mean much when not even Izuku's favorite heroes had done that for him. Regardless, Katsuki was no hero. At least in attitude. I wonder what the exam was like. It was probably strong, given that UA is the most prestigious hero school there was. But even so, it's strong to believe that Kaken might not have passed. Even as kids, Katsuki had always been the best. Not because of his quirk, or because he was smart, but because he worked to be the best. He trained his quirk until he MSDR as much as he could at such a young age, and he studied like crazy until he was the top student in their grade. Sure, he was benefited by the quirk he was born with, but he could have the coolest quirk in the world, and it wouldn't matter unless you worked to hone and MSDR it. And quirks aren't everything. Izuku knows that better than anybody. Even as kids, Kaken's ambition was like no one else's. Izuku wondered if in some alternate universe they might be taking the exam together, working side by side to be number one, motivating one another and pushing each other to be the best that they could be. Maybe in that universe his mother might still be alive and Izuku wouldn't be so alone. Stop it. It's pointless to dream about things that will never happen. That was why Izuku was in a mood. And Eraser had noticed it as soon as he saw him. What's that face for? I have no idea what you're talking about. Izuku answered blankly, not looking at Eraser. The two of them were on a roof and Izuku was sitting on the edge with his legs dangling off the side. He pretended to not see the look in the hero's eyes when he saw him so close to the edge. Even though it had been weeks since the incident, it was still a bit tense between the two of them, and Izuku hated it. Eraser was trying to pretend that everything was fine and back to normal, but Izuku knew just how freaked out he was when he found him dead. He didn't know why, but that's just how it was apparently, and it probably didn't help that Izuku's attitude had changed after he woke up. The hero had commented on it a few times and even had asked about it, only to be cut off by Izuku leaving or changing the subject. He really didn't feel like going into his tragic past and such, so Eraser would just have to deal with it. Alright then, the hero came to sit beside Izuku. We can talk about something else. Oh yeah, he thought for a moment. The UA entrance exam was today. Did you know that? Izuku's face fell before it completely shut down. That wasn't supposed to happen, but Izuku couldn't help it. UA was the last thing he wanted to talk about right now. They could talk about literally anything else. Next, Eraserhead's eyes turned worried, before he schooled his face and hummed as he thought of another topic. What about ... Oh, you like heroes, right? Did you see what All Might did earlier today? Pretty amazing for a daylight hero. I could never be in the spotlight like that. He scoffed as he finished his thought and didn't seem to notice that this conversation wasn't any better. No. Next. Alright then, why don't you tell me a bit about your life? Absolutely not. You know, you're really bad at this. Izuku looked at Eraser from the corner of his eyes and smirked slightly, feeling comfortable to show expressions again. The hero just groaned and flopped on his back with his hands over his face. I know, Iwa. I'm trying, okay. You don't exactly make it easy. Yeah, I guess you're right. He seemed to be trying so strong, but why? What did he get from this? Izuku was just some random kid who happened to be outed as a vigilante, and he witnessed die. It wasn't like he was obligated to be around him anymore. Izuku could handle himself fairly well now, with all of the training the two of them would do. Why are you doing this? The blunt question caught Eraser off guard, and the hero just stared at him for a few seconds before sitting up and staring at Izuku. What do you mean? Izuku gave the hero a look and gestured to himself like it was the most obvious thing in the world. ... This. Being around me, looking after me. It's not like you have to or anything, so why are you doing this? The hero hummed for a moment. That's a good question. Tell you what, an answer for an answer. I don't like that. Izuku grimaced as his mind immediately went over all of the possibly detrimental questions Eraser could ask. Well then I guess you'll never know. Oh, that was not fair. Eraser, you sly little. Izuku continued to glare at the hero, who just shot back a smirk and quirked brow, until he sighed and slumped his shoulders. Fine, what do you want to know? This was a terrible idea. Maybe the worst possible thing he could have agreed to. There were so many questions Eraser could ask that Izuku just wouldn't be able to answer. But would he let him dodge? He should have just walked away and told the hero that he'd see him tomorrow ... So why hadn't he? Perhaps it was Izuku's disregard for his life and anything that had to do with it. But he knew that he couldn't die yet, so why would he risk making things harder for himself? Did he actually like Eraserhead? Sure, the hero had been around for a while and had helped Izuku out. But that didn't mean that they were friends, right? Would that even be the right thing? Eraser could probably be well not his dad, but still. Was it weird to be friends with someone almost twice your age? Was the answer so important? Yes. The entirety of Izuku's life there was only one adult who truly cared for him, and here this man was, grumpy and homeless looking after him just because. There was nothing that he could gain from it, so why was Eraser there? Why did he care? Izuku needed to know, and he was willing to give answers to get it. Well, Izuku's voice seemed to bring the hero out of his train of thought. Alright, first question, how old are you? Ugh, why was Eraser like this? I just turned 15. Izuku hated this already. He didn't want to give out any more information about himself than was necessary. What if him and Tsukuchi figured out that he was dead and orphaned? What would they do? Maybe throw him in another orphanage. Put him in the system. No, that wasn't going to happen. Izuku wouldn't let it. Eraserhead seemed surprised by his answer, but not as much so as he thought that he would be. To be fair, Izuku didn't exactly look old, so it wasn't that big of a stretch. Okay, my turn. Why did you stick around after you first met me? Izuku wasn't going to beat around the bush. He had questions that he wanted answered, and he wanted to get his done and over with. It took the hero a minute to answer, but when he did, Izuku thought he saw the smallest trace of a smile. You intrigued me. What does that even mean? It's my turn now. Now he was actually smirking at a scowling Izuku, who huffed and crossed his little arms. Are you in school? This was a trick question, and they both knew it. Izuku had to accept that it wouldn't take Eraser and Tsukuchi too long to figure out that he was Izuku Midoriya, because there weren't too many dead kids that looked like he did. It was kind of a relief. Izuku's inner monologue was like 75% death jokes, and he thought that Eraserhead might enjoy them, so he was glad that he was able to take that filter off of himself while he was around him. It was also just nice to not have to pretend or keep as many secrets. Kinda strong to be in school when you're dead. The hero's face was difficult to read. His expression was tired as always, but there seemed to be an extra bit of seriously added, and the hint of a smile that he was forcing down. It was hilarious. Alright, that's fair. What do you mean by I intrigued you? I saw a kid jumping across rooftops and face plant. That's pretty interesting. Izuku's eyes squinted as he looked at the nonchalant hero. He thought that this was a game. Can you be serious, please? That sounds like another question. Eraserhead. The hero's smirk dropped at the tone of Izuku's voice, and he cleared his throat. I don't actually know. You were just some random kid that I just so happened to meet, so why was it so important that I see you? Why did it scare me so much to think that you were out fighting criminals and risking your life with no experience? Well, I guess that worrying was kind of pointless considering that you can't die, but still. That was actually more than I expected to get out of him. Your turn. What exactly is your quirk? Izuku's brows furrowed. I don't have his mouth slammed shut before he could finish his sentence. That wasn't true anymore. What? You don't have a quirk? Kid, we both know that that's a lie. All emotion trickled out of Izuku as if a bathtub was being drained. Anytime the topic of quirks had been brought up when he was younger, he had the same reaction. A beating or bullying usually followed quirk-related conversations, so Izuku shut down as a way to protect himself. It seems that the habit was still active. It didn't help that Izuku wasn't too happy with the cards that he had been dealt. How ironic was it that all of his life, he had been bullied and looked down on because he didn't have a quirk. And then when he was ready to leave, when he was finally going to have some peace, he figures out that his quirk makes it so that he can't die. The one thing that he wants to do above anything else. How was that fair? Izuku looked Eraserhead directly in the eyes, feeling absolutely nothing. I don't have a quirk. I have a curse. It took a second for Izuku to come back to himself. All the while Shouta just stared at the kid in shock. A million thoughts running through his mind. The kid wants to die that badly, that he would go as far as to say that his quirk was a curse. It hurt. It hurt so bad to hear him say that. To watch someone so young with so much potential be so devoid of life and feelings in regard to himself. It was terrifying. With that type of attitude, what was stopping him from snapping and deciding that society had screwed him over so completely? Why not do the same to it? The kid could absolutely do it too, which was what was so terrifying. They were walking a thin line, and if Serpentine crossed it, Shouta didn't know if he'd be able to stop him. So then why hadn't he turned? From what little he knew, the kid had been through more than enough to justify it. And especially with how he's been acting recently, it's weird that he's still on their side per se. He was still a vigilante and was still fighting illegally, but he was doing it to help people. Why? Shouta wanted to ask so badly, but he knew that if he did, he wouldn't get a real answer. What he was getting now was a miracle in of itself. He needed to dig just below the surface, coasting just below the line to keep the kid from running. What is your and the detective's relationship? The question caught Shouta off guard. You mean Tsukuchi? He nodded. He's one of those friends I mentioned. We've worked together ever since I graduated, and he's become one of my best friends. Why do you ask? Is that your question? Oh, he was good. The little turd no. Eraser scowled for a moment, before deciding what to ask next. What about your family? Not too deep. Alright Eraser, getting personal, are we? This was dangerous territory. You're going to have to be more specific. Do you have any? Izuku swallowed the vial that crept up his throat. I have had a mom. He knew as soon as he said it that he had said too much. Why did he have to correct himself? This opened up too many doors for possible questions that Izuku did not want to answer. Ugh, he was such an idiot. Did something happen to her? Wait, maybe he was digging too deep. Pass. Eraser shot a look at Izuku that he refused to meet. He just kept on staring forward and hoped that the hero would take the hint and drop it. Alright. What about your dad? Back off a bit, Shouta, don't drive him away. Izuku kept staring forward, the wind ruffling his hair enough that a small strand came out from his bun and he had to tuck it behind his ear. Never knew him. I see. The hero followed Izuku's gaze and SWCH his sitting position. That must be strong. Next question. Do you know who I am? Izuku was tired of this conversation. He needed to end it, but there were still a few things he needed to know first, and he might not get another change to ask. Eraser sighed loudly and let out a half of a sad laugh. We tried. Went through the entire system looking for green hair and green-eyed kids in Japan and came up with nothing. Although now that some other things are known, it might be a bit easier to narrow it down. He paused before he looked at Izuku again. You're dead, aren't you? Izuku gave the hero a really look and gestured to his very much alive body. You know what I mean. Officially you're dead. That's why we couldn't find you, because we were looking for kids who were still considered alive. The two of them let that realization sink in. Izuku was honestly surprised that it took him this long to figure that out. But sometimes people were oblivious to things that they didn't want to see. Eraser was the one to finally break the silence. Does anyone know that you're still alive? I mean. Izuku took a breath, determining whether or not to answer the question honestly or just avoid it. But he knew that if he did, that would be the answer in of itself, so might as well tell the truth. Nope, just you and Suki. I'm sorry, I don't want an apology. He didn't mean for it to come out as cold as it did. And from the way that Eraser flinched, he knew that it was probably worse than he thought. What did he expect? These were touchy subjects and Izuku wasn't exactly an open person. He didn't even mean to say this much, but there was nothing he could do about it now. I think I'm going to go home. See you later, Eraser. Without even waiting for the hero's response, Izuku left. He kept replaying their conversation in his head as he made his way back, and every time he did, he regretted it more and more. He didn't need this. He didn't need whatever this was with Eraser. What he needed was to be gone, and that was something that obviously wasn't going to happen on its own anytime soon. So maybe it was time for Izuku to get creative. Ugh, why won't I freaking die already? Izuku's voice echoed throughout the empty apartment as he tried to calm his breaths that were big and loud. He was at his limit. He had tried every trick in the book, from BLD lost to suffocation to gunshot through the head. How he got a gun, don't ask. He snatched it off of one of the many criminals he took down every night and decided to try and put it to good use. Nothing had worked, he just kept on coming back again, and he was PSS. Every time he went under, as he called it, it was something. Sometimes it would be Katsuki, sometimes he would have to relive his childhood. One time he had to go through the loss of his mother all over again. There was no rhyme or reason to what he saw when he was gone. One time he had even seen what his life might look like if none of this had ever happened. He came back in tears after that one. Actually, he found himself waking up in tears more often than not. Izuku had refused to cry while he was conscious, but those feelings had to be dwelt with one way or another, and apparently his psyche had decided that it would punish him through his dreams and when he was dead. One thing that did come out of all of this, though, was that Izuku was starting to understand his quirk better now. The time between when he died and when he came back differed, and that made him think that he might eventually be able to control how long it took him to come back. He had a theory that right now his mind had a lot to do with what he saw and how long he was out for, but if he learned to control that. He also found out that he came back pretty much unscathed. The only thing that indicated that he died at all were the scars. It seemed that every time he received a fatal injury, that injury healed along with the rest of his body, but it scared for some reason. Maybe it was a mental thing. Dying wasn't exactly easy, so it wasn't too far of a stretch. But whenever he saw Eraserhead, he would have to try to hide and come up with creative explanations as to why he had been getting so many new scars. The hardest one by far was the bullet hole scar, but that one was on either sides of his head and could be covered with his hair if he styled it a certain way. The only thing was that the hair over the two little scars stopped growing, so it was noticeable if you looked strong enough. But he doubted that people's first thought would be a bullet scar, so he wasn't too worried. He did have a few scars on his wrists from when he bled out, and he really didn't like them, but that was before he knew he would start developing scars from what he died from. It's strong to scar from falling from a building, so it wasn't apparent until he died from something visible on his body. It was kind of annoying, but Izuku wasn't one to give up. Although, he was on the verge of at least taking a break. For one, he was tired, like exponentially tired. And it got worse every time he died. That was another theory he had, that his body healed itself kinda like how recovery girls' quirk healed others, by using their stamina. And the other reason was that he was running out of ideas on how to die. There was only so much you can do when you live alone in an abandoned apartment with limited money and resources. It might be a good idea to take a break and decompress. At least he wouldn't have to deal with his mind until he went to sleep. So that meant that he needed a distraction, and what better distraction was there than illegally beating up criminals? It seemed like it was the same old song and dance recently. Shadow would meet up with Serpentine on patrols, they would talk and bicker, he would try to learn more about the kid, he would shut down and leave. Then repeat. This routine was getting on his nerves, which was saying something because he was usually a patient person. Or more patient at least. Maybe it was the stress of having a new class to teach. Sure, Shouta had been doing this for years and it had gotten easier, but it was still not easy. Children never are. They're all different personalities, ways of learning, ways of dealing with different situations, backgrounds, and pasts. There was no instruction manual he could read to be a better teacher. You really had to play it by ear and adjust to each student's individual needs as much as you could while still being fair and consecutive with every other student. Like he had said, strong, but rewarding despite what most believed he thought. It was frustrating because he couldn't treat Serpentine like his students. He didn't even know the kid, and yet he had somehow weaseled his way into Shouta's life and mind and didn't have hope of getting out any time soon. That was where Eraser's mind was as he patrolled with the kid. When he saw him, he had to refrain from grimacing. The face mask covered most of Serpentine's face, but it didn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the tired look that dominated his entire expression. He reminded him of himself ... and that wasn't something that Shouta was happy about. Something had happened. A person doesn't just go from tired to walking zombie within a few days. I mean, they could, but there was something else going on. Eraser had been worried when he didn't see the kid for 2 days, and the sigh of relief that he had when he finally found him tonight was not surprising. He couldn't deny it anymore, he worried about the kid. He knew that technically he would be okay, that he couldn't be hurt that badly because he'd come back, but still. Shouta had come close to death more times than he could count, and none of those experiences were fun ones. They had all taken something from him and burned themselves into his mind forever. Almost dying was scaring ... and he couldn't imagine what actually dying must be like. The number of emotional wounds and scars this kid must have ... was terrifying. Not only that, but he wanted to die. What all did he go through for him to give up like that? Shouta didn't know if he wanted to know the answer to that question. He found the kid sitting on top of 2 criminals that were unconscious, humming to himself. That seemed to be a habit of his, one that Eraser found endearing. The hero walked towards the kid and sighed, making his presence known. You look like CRP. Hello to you too, Eraser. It's been a few days. What, were you catching up on your beauty sleep? We both know that you need that more than I do. His answer was quick and it surprised Shouta slightly. The kid was getting better at this whole sarcastic devil-may-care thing. He looked at the two unconscious criminals, checking what their injuries were so that he could write the report. Ugh, he really hated paperwork. You know, I should start making you fill out the paperwork for the criminals you take down. Then maybe you'd be a bit more sympathetic and give me a break every once in a while. Serpentine scoffed and hopped off of the criminal pile. Haha yeah, you're funny, Eraserhead. It was worth a shot. Shouta shrugged and leaned his back on one of the alley walls. So, how have you been? Staying out of trouble, I hope. The kid gave him a look that was clear as day. Oh, come on, you know me better than that. Unfortunately, it's been whatever. I'm still alive, so there's that. You know it's not healthy for someone, especially someone your age, to want to die so badly. I never claimed to be healthy, just alive. The kid's smirk grew as he looked at Shouta, and I don't know if you're one to talk about being healthy. When's the last time you took a shower? Or slept? Eraser squinted his eyes at the kid. I'll have you know that I shower regularly. Right? Serpentine turned on his heel and began to walk out of the alley. That's why you look homeless all of the time. Uncomfortable. Comfortably greasy. And the kid bolted, knowing that if he stayed any longer, he'd end up in Eraserhead's capture weapon. Oh, I know that look. You saw your son tonight. He's not my son. Tsukuchi laughed as he followed Eraserhead through the station and grabbed a packet of paperwork for his friend. Keep telling yourself that, Shouta. Maybe if you say it enough, you'll start to actually believe it. Eraser whipped his head around and glared at the detective with his quirk adding an extra edge of intimidation. You know that you don't scare me. Tsuki taunted with a grin. You're the worst. Shouta stomped around the corner, leaving Tsukuchi to wait for him to get back. That's why you love me, he called out, drawing a few officers' attention to their exchange. No, I don't. Shouta yelled back with no real menace. Shinso wasn't having a great day. The kids in his class weren't like the ones he had before, but he still felt like an outsider. It was partially his fault. Putting up a front of not wanting to talk to anyone and scaring them off before they approached him wasn't exactly how he expected to make friends, but at least it kept him from getting hurt. He wasn't looking forward to going home either. He knew that as soon as he walked through the front door he would be reprimanded by his foster parents. It had been 3 years now that he had been with them, and they treated him with every bit of contempt as the day they took him in. They set up rules. Shinso couldn't speak or make most noises without getting yelled at. Every time he walked into a room he was met with fearful stares and suspicious eyes. Even his foster siblings didn't like him. It SCK, but that was just his life. And at least he wasn't in an abusive home anymore, well, physically at least. And he was used to it by now. It barely even got to him anymore. His classmates didn't treat him any different. It was strong to be the quiet kid in class with the villain quirk. It made him a target, one that they knew wouldn't be able to fight back because it would just prove their point. That's why he was so surprised to be even mildly accepted at UA. His classmates didn't shun him or cower away. They avoided him, sure, but really was his own doing. He was sure that if he gave them the chance, they'd talk to him. He might even make some friends. Not that he'd ever let that happen. Even though most of his classmates left him alone, there was always a few. They weren't even from his class, but they somehow found out about his quirk and made some comments as he left the building. That was why he was in such a mood. He left school later than usual today, and so he was walking home later. Even just a tiny time difference and the streets were completely different. There were more people, most of them going home from work as it was just after 5. Shinso didn't live in the best part of town. He had seen a lot more criminal takedowns by that new vigilante on the news around the area. He didn't understand how someone could do that. People saw vigilantes as borderline villains, so why would they put themselves in that place? He supposed that some of them didn't have the best intentions, but he knew that some just wanted to help people, just like him. So then why didn't they try to get their licenses and help people legally? Maybe they had. Maybe they were like Shinso and got the short end of the stick and this was their only option. What if he ended up like that? Hitoshi shook his head. No. You're going to be a hero. And you're going to use your quirk to help people. You're going to prove all of them wrong, prove to them that you can be a hero. It was a nice dream, but would it actually come true? Stop it, Hitoshi. You can be a hero. No, he had worked to get where he was, and he was going to go even further. He had to. He took a shortcut through a long alleyway to get to his house. It was one that he took every day and didn't think anything of it being later in the day. That was until he heard footsteps behind him and his mind screeched to a halt. Hey, kid. Where are you going in such a rush? A rough voice called out from behind him. Shinso paid him no mind and just kept walking, hoping that he would get out of this unscathed. But of course, life never really was on his side, was it? The footsteps got louder and the voice got colder. I said, where are you going? Keep walking ... just keep walking. Maybe he'll go away. CRP. The guy rounded in front of Shinso, stopping him in his tracks. He was huge, at least twice his size, and he looked mean. His quirk looked intimidating too, some kind of crab hand quirk or something. All he knew was that it would hurt like hell to be caught in his pinchers. It's rude to ignore people when they're talking to you. You know, 1 second the crab guy was leaning over Shinso, looking ready to kill him. And the next a blur of black and green dropped from the sky with a yelp and landed on the guy, sending him crumpling to the ground. Oh, shiitake mushrooms. I really didn't mean to do that. The figure stood up and nudged the guy with his bright red shoes and groaned when he didn't move. He then bent down to check his pulse and breathed a sigh of relief that Shinso took as a sign that he didn't kill him. He was small, the guy who dropped from the sky, maybe around his own age, but smaller than usual. And he was dressed head to ankle in black. The only thing that was even remotely noticeable about him was his bright green eyes and curly green hair pulled back into a bun. Oh, Shinso thought. This was that new vigilante, the one he was just thinking about. Maybe he was summoned by Shinso's thoughts. The vigilante stood up and looked at Shinso, as if just noticing him. Oh, hi. Sorry about that. I wasn't planning on falling on the guy like that. I just missed my footing on the roof, and he just so happened to be there. I hope that he's not a friend of yours or anything. Believe me, he's not. Okay, good. I should probably call Eraser and have him take care of this. He seemed to go off on a little mumbled rant before he came back to reality, and glanced at Shinso again. Are you okay? Heard it all. Shinso blinked. This was really weird. No. Great. The vigilante pulled out a phone and dialed someone's number on it. Hey Eraser, I got some fresh criminal for you in an alley here. Eraser. ... is an Eraserhead. Serpentine. How did you get my number? The voice on the other end asked. The volume on the phone turned all the way up so Shinso could hear the conversation even though it wasn't on speaker. The vigilante scoffed and nudged the crabman with his foot again. Your lack of faith in me is hurtful. It's not lack of faith, it's me wondering how you got my number. Do you even have a phone? Duh, what teenager doesn't have a phone? A dead one. I'm sorry, a what? Touché. Anyway, you better come pick this punk up before he wakes up. When I dropped in, he didn't seem too friendly. Was that a pun? There was a long groan on the other line followed by some muffled conversation that Shinso couldn't quite make out. I'll be there in 5. Send me the location. You got it. And don't go anywhere. No promises, the vigilante replied back in sing-song. Another sigh and then the call ended. What just happened? Well, he should be here soon. While we wait for him, the vigilante moved out his hand to Shinso. I'm Serpentine. I'm aware. Shinso shook it warily, as if it might hurt him if he made any sudden movements. Oh, thanks ... for taking down that guy. The vigilante looked down at the still unconscious thug. What, him? Oh, that was a complete accident, but I'm glad that I could help. Why was he bothering you anyway? Who knows? It's nothing new though. The purple-haired kid that looked almost as tired as Izuku did answered with his hands in his pockets, and refusing to meet his eyes. He looked around his age, and he was scrawny. Kinda scary looking with the shadows falling on his face the way they did. But to Izuku he just looked cool. What's that mean? Shinso looked at the vigilante. He hadn't expected for him to continue the conversation. That was the perfect opportunity for him to stop talking, so why didn't he? It didn't make sense. Nothing, don't worry about it. And you don't have to talk to me, you know. Izuku plopped down beside the unconscious criminal and patted the ground next to him. Come sit. He stretched out his short legs and began to fidget with one of the hair ties on his wrist. Talk to me, what did you mean that it wasn't anything new? Hitoshi complied to the vigilante's request hesitantly. Was he really about to have a heart-to-heart with Serpentine? Really? Well, it wasn't like he had anywhere to be anyway, and he definitely didn't want to go home. No, it's nothing, just he met the vigilante's green eyes that seemed to be tearing into his soul and gave up trying to dodge. He somehow knew that even if he did, he wouldn't get very far. I get bullied sometimes. Izuku hummed under his face mask. He knew all about that. Why, my quirk. They say that it's a villain's quirk and that I can never be a hero with a quirk like that. It really is because I've wanted to be a hero ever since I was little, and I even took the entrance exam for the hero course at UA. But I didn't pass because my quirk wasn't physically powerful enough. And I bet that gave them even more to say. Yeah, Shinso scoffed, thinking back to how bad the bullying had gotten just before he graduated middle school. He would come home with black eyes and bruises all over, and his foster parents just completely ignored it. His foster dad even went as far to say that he deserved it one night at dinner. But it's been getting better lately. And what does your family think about this? CRP. Hitoshi didn't exactly want to talk about his family issues with some random stranger, ever if he was a up-and-coming vigilante. He barely knew the guy. Oh, they're fine. Serpentine looked at Hitoshi out of the side of his eyes, and he knew that his lie wasn't as good as he wanted it to be. He tried again. This home is a lot better than my last one. They don't hit me and they provide everything that I need. That sounds like basic human decency to me. Did they even try to stop the bullying? What was this? Why was he so interested in Hitoshi's life? Not exactly ... but it's okay. It's not their fault that I have such a villainous quirk. I'm just glad that they took me in and continue to take care of me. So, you're a foster kid. It wasn't really something he liked talking about. Remembering that his parents apparently didn't love him enough to keep him and just dumped him at the door of the closest orphanage wasn't exactly a happy memory. He had been through 6 different homes before this one, all of which condemned him for his quirk and got rid of him as soon as they possibly could. This home was the longest one he had ever had. The couple that fostered him had 3 other foster children that they took care of. They were nice enough, but they were of course wary of him and what he could do. So, they took some precautions in the house. Hitoshi was not allowed to speak while at home. The whole family took up sign language classes so that they'd be able to communicate with him, and he had a designated notebook he was to talk with at school since he technically wasn't supposed to talk there either, but he didn't really use it. They made sure that everyone he was around knew of his quirk and exactly how it worked so that they could be prepared and take their own precautions. And Hitoshi was usually secluded in his room except for mealtimes and other special occasions. It was to ensure their safety from him. Sure, it was unnecessary, and yeah, it hurt, but if it made them feel better, then he'd deal with it. He'd be out of the house soon anyway, and then they wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. Something that they did when they first took him in was forcing him to attend weekly classes on how to be a good citizen. They'd make him watch villain rehabilitation videos and lectures on how to properly help people. Things to try to teach the villain out of him. Once Hitoshi told them his longing to be a hero, they eased up on the classes and videos. They probably assumed that if he wanted to be a hero, then he didn't want to be a villain, and therefore they didn't have to deal with those anymore. Like he said, they really were nice people who had taken him in and kept him longer than anyone else. They did slip up and yell or say something mean to him every once in a while, but they tried their best to keep things civil between them, which he appreciated. Are they good? Serpentine's voice pulled Hitoshi out of his head and he hummed questioningly. Your foster parents, are they good people? Were his foster parents good people? They took him in, so they must be, right? I think so, yeah. The vigilante nodded, staring at nothing in particular. Brain working a million miles a minute, no doubt. Do they love you? It came out of nowhere, and probably shouldn't have caught Shinso as off guard as it did. But the question hung in the air as he looked at the vigilante, who was now searching his eyes for an answer. Hitoshi didn't know how to answer the question. He didn't really know what love felt like. All he had ever had was tolerance at best. Was what his foster parents did for him love. He read about love in books and saw it on TV, but it looked different there. According to them, love was self-sacrificing. Love was putting someone else first and doing everything you can to be there for them and be with them. Love was encouraging one another and listening to them when they needed you to. It's seeing the worst part of them and staying anyways. That wasn't what Hitoshi had. And he didn't think he ever has. No, I don't think they do. People who love you express that love, whether it be in telling you very, or showing it through their actions. That's not what his foster parents did. Hitoshi felt a drop of liquid on his hand that was resting in his lap. What? Is it raining? He looked up to see that the alley was covered above them, and then he felt another drop run down his cheek. He lifted a hand up to his face to find that he was crying. Oh wow, he scrambled to his feet and retreated to the alley wall to wipe his face and pull himself together. I can't believe I let myself cry in front of a vigilante. The vigilante. How pathetic can you get? It's all right. A low voice sounded quietly behind him. Hitoshi turned around to see Serpentine looking at him with sad eyes. Ones that were very different from before. It's okay to cry, sometimes. When you need to. What? This was too much for Shinso. Bottling up your emotions like that isn't healthy and will just hurt you in the long run. Believe me, I would know. He got up and stretched as he continued on. Crying doesn't make you weak. It proves that you're strong enough to care. Hitoshi tried, but the words failed to form as he stared at the sad-eyed vigilante and next to him. The weight of his words ... they held so much feeling, so much anguish. It made him sad. He had never been much of a vigilante sympathizer, and his eyes, they were one step away from villainy. And that was one step too close. But as he sat here with Serpentine, someone who was as human as he was, who had feelings like he did, he had to reconsider. What had he been through to elicit such pain in his expression? What's your name? The sudden question drew Hitoshi from his thoughts once again. The mood had shifted, as if that entire conversation hadn't just happened, and the vigilante looked at him with an expectant raised eyebrow. Shinso. Hitoshi Shinso. Good. It'd be pretty awkward for us to exchange tragic backstories and not even know each other's names. Hitoshi's eyebrows furrowed. But I don't know your name. Well done, Serpentine scoffed. That's kind of the whole idea. He started but was cut off by cloth shooting from the mouth of the alley and wrapping Serpentine up like a burrito. Both boys turned to where the cloth came from and found a red-eyed Eraserhead glaring at them, or Serpentine mostly. This is a bit overkill, don't you think, Eraser? When it comes to you, nothing is enough. Okay, that's fair. The underground hero released the vigilante from his scarf and walked towards them, taking in the scene. All the while, Hitoshi was fangirling in silence at his all-time favorite hero showing up, and he was here standing in front of him and... Stop. Keep your cool, Hitoshi, he's just a hero. Just the coolest hero ever. The hero walked closer to them and examined the still unconscious thug on the ground. He looked up after he determined that he was still alive. You did this? He asked Serpentine with tired eyes. The vigilante just nodded and the hero sighed deeply. Well, he's not dead, so there's that. Hey now, we both know I've never killed anyone. I'm the one who wants to die, remember? Another sigh. How could I forget? He then seemed to take Hitoshi into account and looked him over. He nodded his head towards Shinso and asked, He with you? No, I found him. Oh my god. I slipped off of the roof and landed on that criminal who was threatening him. I saved his life and then we talked about our tragic backstories. And we both know you have plenty of that. Eraserhead rolled his eyes and brought his hands up to his temple to rub as if fighting an oncoming headache. Are you hurt? He asked Hitoshi, who was still staring wide-eyed at the interaction in front of him. Any emotional trauma? Well, any that wasn't caused by this one. He jabbed his thumb at Serpentine, who smiled innocently under his mask, and Hitoshi was just noticing, was somehow free from Eraserhead's capture weapon. Hitoshi shook his head, still not able to calm himself down enough to function like a proper human being. Pull it together, Hitoshi. Okay, I'm going to need both of you to come to the station with me to give statements. Before he even finished his sentence, his scarf shot out and wrapped Serpentine up once again, who had looked like he was trying to run away. Not so fast. You need to learn to deal with the consequences of your own actions, and that means paperwork. But I don't want the Vigilante whined while Eraserhead dragged him out of the alley with the criminal DD over his other shoulder and motioned for Hitoshi to come too. I don't care. You fight, you right, that's how it goes. Serpentine groaned and pouted as he continued to be dragged the entire way to the police station. Tsuki. Eraserhead dragged Serpentine through the station doors as if it was just another Tuesday, and the Vigilante hadn't stopped grumbling until he saw one of the detectives who, when he saw him, seemed to age 10 years. Serpentine. He took in the situation and rubbed his forehead before turning to Eraserhead. Dang, looks like I owe you $20. At this, the underground hero smirked and yanked Serpentine to his feet. The Vigilante looked between the two of them with a look of betrayal in his eyes. Have you two been betting on me? Yes, both answered at the same time and chuckled. I was hoping that you'd take a bit longer to bring in, but it seems that Eraser has stepped up his game. I don't know about that. If he really wanted to get away, I have no doubt that he could. He probably just wanted to see you again and annoy the two of us as much as possible. That's not true, Serpentine cried out with a scoff. I also wanted to spend more time with my new friend. He gestured at Hitoshi with his head. Eraserhead sighed and the detective laughed, an interesting dynamic if Shinso had ever seen one. I feel sorry for you if Serpentine now considers you his friend. He patted Hitoshi's shoulder and then the two of them turned and started walking through the station, still dragging the Vigilante behind him and carrying the criminal on his shoulder. The hero dropped the criminal off in an interrogation room and made sure that he was restrained for when he eventually woke up, while Hitoshi, the detective, and a burritoed Serpentine waited in the hallway. Geez, what did you do to knock that guy out so cold? The detective nudged the Vigilante's shoulder. It was an accident, he cried. The detective scoffed and crossed his arms. Of course it was. He looked over at Hitoshi, who was awkwardly just going along with whatever happened, because he had absolutely no idea what to do in this situation. He must have picked up on his discomfort because he stretched out his hand in front of Serpentine, who stood in between the two of them. I'm Detective Tsukuchi. And you must be the new friend that Serpentine was talking about, right? Hitoshi let out a nervous laugh and accepted the detective's outstretched hand. Apparently so. My name is Hitoshi Shinso. It's very nice to meet you, Shinso. Eraserhead finally came out of the interrogation room with a sigh. You really did a number on him, kid. I didn't mean to. Katsuki walked into UA with an attitude that he thought he'd never see himself with. He looked around at all of the students and teachers walking through the halls and felt a sense of humbleness. He was here, he was actually here. He was going to be a hero and help people. A very different goal than he had in the past. Past Katsuki only cared about winning and being the best, and he didn't care who he had to walk over to get there. But things were different now. He saw just how much that mentality hurts him and, more importantly, those around him. A hero was supposed to save people, to put others before themselves and risk their lives for the well-being of those who can't. That wasn't what Katsuki had wanted to do. His ambitions were selfish and greedy and led to the hurt of everyone around him. He didn't want to be that person anymore. He wanted to help people, he wanted to bring comfort and hope to them like All Might did. He wanted to win, sure, but he had a new mentality. Win to save and save to win. There couldn't be one without the other. He couldn't count it as a win if he didn't protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and he couldn't protect anyone if he was too weak. I won't be that person anymore. I refuse to intentionally hurt the people I care about just to rise to the top. I will be better. I have to be ... for Izuku. Izuku had it right. He knew exactly what it was to be a hero and he had everything it took. If only Katsuki hadn't crushed his dreams, if only he hadn't driven him to. If only he had been just a bit more observant that day. Maybe he would have noticed that something was wrong. Sure, he didn't know about Auntie Inko's death yet or about whatever else Izuku was going through, but he should have been able to tell. They grew up together. They knew more about each other than anyone else. He should have been able to tell. Then maybe he would still be here. Hey, back you go. A loud voice yanked Katsuki from his spiraling thoughts and he realized that he was standing in front of his classroom. Class 1A. He turned to find that girl from the exam. Uraraka, he thought her name was. The two of them woke up in the UA infirmary after the exam and got the chance to introduce themselves before Recovery Girl came to do her last checkups to make sure that both of them were okay, and then sent them home. Looking at her now was very different than seeing her during or after the exam. She had this air of warmth about her. Maybe it was because she looked so welcoming with her round chocolate eyes and bright smile. Or maybe that was just Uraraka. Oh, hey. He turned to look at her. It's Uraraka, right? Yep. She smiled at him and Katsuki felt like he had just been hit with a sudden wave of heat or something. How was it possible for someone to be so cheery? Not even Izuku was this cheery. Pretty cool that we're both in the same class, don't you think? That was a good point. He didn't doubt that she would pass the exam, but what were the odds that the two of them would end up in the same class together? Yeah. Hey, we'd better head in. Wouldn't want to be late on our first day. Inside of the one classroom was interesting. There were all kinds of students, ones that had physically manifested or obvious quirks, ones with more subtle appearances, ones that just gave off powerful vibes, and ones that were a lot more chill. It was nice looking at people through this new perspective. He felt like he was finally able to appreciate those around him, rather than discounting them right off the bat. As the two of them walked across the front of the classroom, Katsuki noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye and stopped to look. It was a large yellow sleeping bag peeking out from behind the teacher's desk, and it looked to have something in it. Well, that's not creepy at all. He took another second to stare at whatever that was and then continued to his seat that just so happened to be right in front of Uraraka. What were the odds? Turns out the thing that was in the obnoxious sleeping bag was their homeroom teacher Shouta Aizawa. Honestly, Katsuki hadn't believed it at first. The guy looked like he hadn't showered or slept in weeks, and he had literally just crawled out of a sleeping bag. Not exactly what he expected his teacher to look like, but the longer he looked at him the more he realized that despite his appearance, there was this air about him. It was strong to explain, but Katsuki knew that all of the teachers at UA were pro-heroes, and he could tell that this one was not one to mess with. The way he held himself just standing in front of the class was enough to prove this. After introducing himself, he told the class to change into their gym uniforms and meet him outside. He led them behind the school to an open area and explained that they were going to go through a quirk assessment to see where they stood. He also threatened that the student with the lowest score would be immediately expelled, and he was pretty sure that he saw one boy with purple hair burst into tears. Katsuki did well in the assessments. He wasn't just being CCKY. If there was one thing that he did have, it was good control over his quirk and different ways to use it so that he could overcome almost any obstacle. That was Izuku's idea. When he first got his quirk, most people focused on its offensive ability, but Izuku immediately began to think and speculate on how it could be used. He had helped Katsuki learn different techniques and strategies to use in most situations before their falling out. And by falling out, Katsuki of course meant when he learned of Izuku's quirklessness, and immediately discarded him as a friend and human being. The assessment ended. Overall, the class did pretty well in Katsuki's eyes. Of course, there was always room for improvement, but from what he could tell, all of his classmates were strong and determined. Well, almost all of them. During the tests, he kept hearing the purple-haired kid make comments and little jokes that were making everyone, the girls especially, more and more uncomfortable. It got so bad that after a particular comment, a guy with red spiky hair literally punched him for what he said. Katsuki didn't hear it, but going by the people around him, it was bad. Mr. Aizawa went through each of their scores and talked a bit before he paused and called the name of the kid with purple hair Mainta. The kid walked up to the glaring teacher whimpering, and Mr. Aizawa told the remainder of the class to go on about the rest of their day, and that they'd see him later. They continued with their first day, being introduced to their teachers and getting accustomed to UA and how it did things. If today was any indication, then Katsuki was in for a wild year. Shouta was right, this year's litter was interesting. The two who made a big impression during the exam were in his class along with a few more characters. He had a diverse class this year, and he just hoped that most of them would make it to their second year without being expelled, but that was completely on them. The first day ended and Shouta felt like he had a solid grasp on each student's potential. Like he said, this class might just surprise him if they focus and pay attention, but he did already have to expel one student. He watched him thoroughly throughout the day and decided that he did not have the potential or conviction to be a proper hero if he was going to act the way he did. It might have been a quick decision, but Shouta trusted his instincts, and they were telling him that the kid was bad news. All too soon, the rest of the week came, and before he knew it, they were in the USJ waiting for All Might to show up so they could begin their rescue training. But All Might wouldn't be coming. 13 informed Shouta that he had used almost all of his time this morning and that Nezu was making him stay in the teacher's lounge to rest. The idiot. He had a responsibility to these students. When you become a teacher, they become your number one priority. It doesn't matter that he's the number one hero. He has very limited time to give this class, and as such, he needs to be careful and use it to the best of his ability. Shouta would have to have a talk with him at the end of the day. 13 had been explaining what they were doing today when the hairs on Shouta's neck stood up and he whipped around to notice a purple blob expanding right behind them. This wasn't right. Today was supposed to just be rescue exercises, and he had never seen anything like this. A pale hand emerged from the blob and Eraserhead's mind completely SWCH gears. He pulled his goggles on and crouched into a fighting stance as he yelled at his students to stand back. What's going on? Is this part of the... I said stay back. Those are real villains. It was just a hunch, but it was better to be safe than sorry. And once the blob got big enough, more and more people came from it following someone covered in pale hands, and wearing red shoes that reminded him way too much of Serpentine. Not the time, Shouta. I thought you said that All Might would be here. Was our information wrong? The hand villain asked the blob that was more recognizable as some sort of person with no tangible body from the looks of it. It seems so, Tamira. Shall we retreat and try again another day? The blob, or mist villain, responded. Tamira, apparently, pondered. Nah, better make an impression while we're here. A few dead students oughta do the trick, don't you think? Shouta flinched as he heard the two discussing killing his students. No. And no, he wouldn't let that happen. He couldn't. Over my dead body. Shouta stepped forward and readied his capture weapon as 13 ushered the kids away. The hand villain stepped closer too and smirked from behind the hand that lay over his face. That can be arranged. Mr. Aizawa. Kurajiri. Before Shouta could even turn around, the mist villain was already upon his students who were screaming and trying to scramble away. And then they were just gone. He turned back to the hand villain with a scowl. What did you do to them? He growled. Oh, they're fine. For now, at least. Kurajiri moved to the large group of villains behind the hand villain and soon they disappeared as well. If I were you, I'd worry about myself. But not all of them. This was bad. Like this was really, really bad. Shouta was an underground hero known for stealth and quick takedowns. His quirk and fighting style were perfect for that, but he was surrounded by dozens of villains all coming at him at once, and he didn't know how much longer he could fight like that. Don't get him wrong, he was winning, but for how long? It didn't help that hand villain, Shigaraki was his name apparently, was watching and analyzing him fight, but there wasn't much he could do about that at the moment. Okay, half of the villains were down, if Shouta could hold out just a little bit longer. Just then, Shigaraki moved and Eraser couldn't dodge out of the way fast enough. He ended up behind him and then a sudden burning pain exploded from his right elbow. Shouta chanced to look to see what had happened, and found his elbow flaking away and Shigaraki smirking at him. It must have had something to do with his quirk then. Eraser cancelled the effect of the quirk which only succeeded in slowing down the disintegration process, but that would have to do for now. He knocked out the villain that he was currently fighting and then jabbed his leg behind him, landing a solid kick to Shigaraki's gut and sending him flying back. I have to finish this quickly. There's no telling how much longer I'll be able to hold out. It took Shigaraki a bit to recover and when he did, Shouta was just finishing off his little gang of goons. I bet you think you're all that, don't you? He breathed as he began to slowly walk towards Eraser. He shrugged and got into a fighting pose. It seems that way. I'm going to make you regret ever stepping foot in UA and attacking my students. Oh yeah. The look on the villain's face wasn't right. It wasn't the look of someone who was bluffing, but Shouta had just taken out his army, so why? Shigaraki snapped his fingers and every thought left Shouta as he was slammed into the ground by an unknown force. Eraser coughed as the air entered back into his lungs and he realized what had just happened. There was some sort of creature sitting on top of him. He tried to cancel its quirk, but nothing happened. How was that possible? It had to have some sort of strength or speed quirk, so why wasn't his quirk working? I bet you're wondering why you can't cancel Nomu's quirk. Well, that's because there's just too many quirks to cancel. What? You know, you're actually really cool, Eraserhead. Shigaraki knelt down beside Shouta and smiled at him. It's too bad that you're too much of a nuisance to keep alive. We brought Nomu here to kill All Might, but I guess that a little warm-up couldn't hurt. Not that you have any chance against it anyway. Shigaraki, I swear if you heard any of my before Shouta could finish his threat, the Nomu shoved his face into the concrete with a crack. Mr. Aizawa. Shut up, the villain whined as he sidestepped the growing pool of BLD coming from Shouta's face. You may be cool, Eraser, but you're a huge pain in the butt. And for that, you must die before you become even more of a problem. He didn't move again, not even when the Nomu eventually got off of him or when he was apparently carried away by his students. He couldn't wake up no matter how strong he tried or how much he screamed in his head. He was helpless, useless, and he hated it. Shouta woke up with a gasp and was met with complete darkness. After a moment he began to panic. The quiet beeping that was steady in the background began to increase as his thoughts ran rapid. The last thing he remembered was getting his face slammed into the concrete ... and then again ... and again ... and again until he eventually passed out. What if that thing had permanently damaged his eyes? His quirk wouldn't work without his eyes. He wouldn't ever be able to see his students, or his friends, or his problem child ever again. Before he could go into even deeper of a spiral, he heard a soft thud and the sound of something sliding open and then the crash and grunt of someone falling and cursing under their breath. Kid. The only person who would be stupid and crazy enough to literally fall through the locked window of a hospital was Serpentine, and honestly, Shouta wouldn't put it past him. Surprise. Izuku had heard about the attack on the school and about Eraserhead's condition. That one had taken some digging, but he also managed to figure out what hospital he was at and even the room number he was in. He wasn't sure if he should be thankful or scared that this information was this easy to find. Not that it was too easy, because it wasn't, but it would be something that he'd have to bring up to Eraser once he recovered. Then Izuku found himself looking at the front of the hospital, actually the same hospital he escaped right after he came back for the first time. According to his info, Eraser was on the 6th floor in room 6 degrees Celsius. He could do that. It wasn't difficult to scale the building. What was difficult was staying out of sight of both the patients in other rooms and the people outside who could see him. And snapping the lock off of the window from the outside was also not a walk in the park, but he still managed to do it. He just hoped that he had the right room. Once he got the window open, Izuku tried to shimmy his way through gracefully, but he hadn't ever done anything graceful in his entire life, so why would this be any different? It wouldn't. And that's why he wasn't surprised when he fell through the window and crashed to the floor, letting out a string of words under his breath that he never would have said before. Kid. Eraser's voice snapped him out of his pity party, and when he saw the frantic, mummified figure of the pro hero, Izuku felt his heart ease. He could see for himself that he was okay, that he wasn't hurt too badly, or did he really care about him that much? Had they gotten that close over the past few months? Surprise. Even though he probably couldn't see him, Eraserhead's head snapped in Izuku's direction, and he could just tell that he was glaring at him. After another few seconds of him probably glaring at him, Eraser let out a sigh in relief. What are you doing here, problem child? And did I just hear you fall through the window? Haha. Yeah. How far up are we? 6 floors. Oh my, you know what? I'm not even going to try. Why are you here? Izuku crossed the room and sat in the chair beside Eraser's hospital bed. Is it that strong to believe that I was worried about you? He couldn't even see his face, but Izuku knew that Eraser was rolling his eyes under his bandages. The jerk. In all seriousness, I was actually worried and wanted to come and see that you were all right for myself. The hero started but stopped as if trying to find the right words. Thank you for coming to see me. Even though I can't actually see you right now. Izuku shot up from his chair. Oh yeah. He walked towards the closed door and opened it gingerly before peeking his head outside to make sure that no one was around. Once he determined that the cost was clear, he nabbed the chart from where it sat in the wall cubby thing and carried it back to his seat. Let's have a look at your chart. I got some details from snooping, but not a lot. You what? Chill out, it wasn't anything too illegal. According to Eraser's chart, he came out of that whole situation incredibly lucky, especially considering how much damage he obtained. His right elbow was chipping away and his face was almost completely shattered due to whatever that Namu thing they were talking about did to him. There didn't seem to be any permanent damage, just some scarring. Izuku let out a breath and silently thanked God. It could have turned out so much different if All Might hadn't shown up and defeated the monster, or if his students hadn't gotten him away when they did. What does it say? Eraser asked eagerly. Izuku hummed, nothing much, there's no permanent damage, but you will have a few scars. But that's not really bad news, scars are cool. The hero scoffed and let out a relieved chuckle. Yeah. Yeah, I guess they are. Were you worried? About what? What happened to you? What had been done to you? Were you scared that your sight was gone? Is that why you looked so scared when I dropped in? Another scoff. I guess even with whatever is on my face, you can still read me like an open book. Hey, not really. I just happened to get lucky this time. I'm glad though. I don't know what I would have done if I had lost my sight. Izuku looked at the hero that was bandaged from literal head to toe from his fight with villains that infiltrated the school. And he had to hold off by himself from what Izuku read. You'd still be a great hero, with or without your sight. I guess you're right. Of course I am. Before Eraser could retort, the door to the room opened and both of them tensed, not expecting anyone to come in. Izuku had nowhere to run, so he would just have to deal with whoever was coming in. The door opened fully to reveal a surprised-looking Tsukuchi before his face relaxed into a more tired expression. Why am I not surprised? Hey Tsuki. Tsukuchi walked in, followed shortly by someone with blonde hair and glasses. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd say that was Present Mike in a man bun and hipster glasses coming to visit Eraserhead. He walked in and noticed Izuku sitting beside Eraser's bed and stiffened. Oh. Hey listener. We didn't know that Shouta had any visitors. He doesn't. This little gremlin probably broke in here. Tsukuchi commented and received a point and wink in confirmation from Serpentine. Oh my god, what did you break? Just the window lock. Just the window. He cut himself and held the sides of his head with his hands as he tried to calm himself down. Present Mike watched the exchange with wide eyes, before he turned to Izuku and looked him up and down. Something seemed to CLCK, and he smiled. You must be Serpentine. Shouta has told me a lot about you. Eraser talks about me. He sure does. Zashi. Eraser's voice came as a warning. First name's He must be one of those friends you were talking about, right Eraser? The hero sighed as Present Mike laughed and even Tsuki snickered from the corner of the room. But if you use his first name, why don't you call Tsukuchi by his first name? This time the detective groaned before he joined the rest of them surrounding Eraser. We do it to annoy him. Tsuki sounds a lot cuter than Naomasa, so that's what we call him. And I hate it. But you love us. Present Mike leaned his head on Tsukachi's shoulder only to be brushed off, resulting in him and Izuku laughing, Tsuki huffing, and Eraser looking at them with what was probably a confused face. He then turned to Izuku with a smile. We're only a few of Shouta's friends. Another should be showing up any minute now. Oh no. No, please Zash, I know. It's too late, she just texted me that she's on her way up. Mike and Tsukuchi looked ecstatic for whoever was coming. But Izuku could just feel the dread seeping off of Eraser, who could be coming that caused him so much grief. Hey Eraser. The door slammed open and a woman with green hair and a smile so bright that Izuku actually thought that the room got brighter walked in. Joke, Fukukado. It was crazy how many pros Izuku was able to recognize outside of their hero costumes. Guess that's what happens when you spend pretty much your entire life studying and analyzing everything about them. Joke crossed the room and sat in the last open chair around Eraser's hospital bed. Come now, Shouta, what happened to Emi? I only call you Emi when I actually like you. So, you admit that you like me. I do not. Awa, come on Sho, we all know that you two are bound to get together. Why resist it so much? Shut up Hisashi. I do not like her. Eraser tried his best to defend himself and snapped his head to where he probably thought that Tsuki was don't you dare say a thing Tsuki. The detective held up his hands in defense, wasn't going to. Shouta, who's this? No wait, let me guess. Ms. Joke seemed very excitable, although Izuku supposed that she was always like that from what he knew of her. She took in Izuku and it was a minute before she spoke up again. Izuku was glad that he had the mind to slip into his vigilante garb before coming, otherwise, he'd be in trouble. Oh, is this that serpentine kid you always talk about? I do not talk about him. The three friends laughed at Eraser's outburst while he huffed and crossed his bandage's arms. No need to be so defensive, Shouta, we're all friends here. Even your son Tsuki didn't even get to finish his sentence before a pillow was thrown at his face faster than any of them had thought possible, and with creepily perfect accuracy from someone who literally looked like a mummy. This just sent them into even more laughter, which Izuku joined in with. Izuku had begun to pick up the slack while Eraser was in the hospital recovering. It wasn't like the hero had asked Izuku to or anyone else for that matter. And there were other heroes that were in the area already and more than capable to handle the nightly patrols themselves, but it just felt right. While he patrolled Eraserhead's usual spots, he made sure to be careful and attentive. This was more than him just keeping an ear out for kicks and giggles, so he needed to treat it as such. Tsukuchi was surprised the first time Izuku called the station to report a robbery that he had stopped and told the young boy to bring the perpetrators down and fill out some quick paperwork. It struck Izuku as weird that they just let him do that. He was a vigilante, why weren't they trying to capture him or take him down? Sure, he wasn't hurting anyone, and he technically wasn't breaking any laws, but still. Hey Tsuki, Serpentine, this must be what you called about. Yep, can I have the paperwork? I really need to get back. This caused the detective to let out a chuckle while he laid a small stack of papers in front of the vigilante. You only need to fill out the first stapled papers, but I have a feeling that you'll be back. Thanks. Izuku sat down and began to fill out what Eraser had showed him a few weeks ago while Tsuki took the robbers to either a cell or an interrogation room. He came back not too long after and Izuku was just finishing up. You seem to be taking this very seriously. Any particular reason? Nope. Thanks Tsuki, I'll be back in a bit. And he was out the station doors before the detective could get another word out. Two officers walking by watched the vigilante skip right past them and out of the station. They stopped in their tracks and looked at each other, making sure that they both just saw the same thing. Was that Serpentine? Did we just witness a known vigilante literally skip away from the police? They stared at each other for a minute longer before one of them sipped their coffee and shrugged as he continued to walk. I didn't see anything. If Tsukuchi didn't see, then neither did I. They were right, of course. Serpentine had paid about 4 more visits to the station to drop off criminals and fill out the incident reports before going out again. Each time he'd catch the attention of some police officers just trying to do their job, and the poor guys would just gape at the young vigilante running in and out of the station and chatting with the detective. None of them really knew what to do about the situation. They knew the rules about vigilantism, but neither the chief nor Tsukuchi had directly said anything to them about Serpentine, so most of them just tried to stay out of it as such as they could. But the sight of the detective having banter with the kid and watching him come and go with a glint of affection in his eyes was what really caught them all off guard. They decided not to mention it. No one wanted to be on Tsukuchi's bad side. It was nice, helping people semi-officially. A small part of Izuku wondered if he might have been able to have this as another life. If maybe he could have applied and gotten into UA to train to be a hero. Maybe work beside Eraserhead for a bit and then eventually branch off and work his way up the hero rankings. Although, Izuku wasn't sure that if he had his choice now, he would choose to be a daylight hero. They were in the spotlight and had to deal with the media and their image and all of that frivolous stuff that underground heroes just got to brush off and really focus on their work. He shook his head. That wasn't possible. He knew that he couldn't be a hero. Even if there was a possibility, what were they going to do? Enroll the dead kid in a hero school? And that didn't even take into consideration his quirk and how far behind his classmates he would be. Even if he did manage to get into UA, he'd just be a dead weight. Better to utilize his skills here where he was useful. Izuku had just left the station for the 4th time and was walking down a street when he heard something in an alley he had just passed. Why is it always the alleys? Why can't anything happen in the middle of the well-lit street? He poked his head to try and see what was happening and was shocked when he saw one of the daylight heroes beating up some criminal. What were they doing? Their patrol was hours ago and not near here at all, so what was going on? If Izuku was right, it was that Conductor. From what he knew, the hero was relatively new, hadn't even been on the scene 5 years yet. His quirk was electrostatic. He was able to generate and manipulate the static electricity around him. The hero was actually extremely creative with his quirk, utilizing it to form different weapons and even using it defensively. It was impressive. It didn't take the pro long to finish his takedown, and once he did, Izuku tried to bolt before he saw him. But of course that did not work out. Hold it. The hero's voice was loud as he called to Izuku from down the alley. Who are you and what is your business? Business? Oh, I don't have any business. I was actually just about to leave and let you do your thing. So if I could just— He had tried to leave the mouth of the alley but found that an electric field was stopping him. He turned back to the hero with an incredulous look on his face. Seriously, I would watch your tone if I were you. Look man, I'm really just trying to get out of your hair. If you could just let me leave, then you won't have to see me ever again. Conductor scoffed as he tied up the criminal he had taken down and began to walk towards Izuku. I know you ... You're that new vigilante. Serpentine, wasn't it? Izuku sighed. He still wasn't used to people recognizing him and he didn't think he ever would be. I guess. HMPH, the mood of the alley changed in an instant. What was once cautious and left room for playfulness was now ... less than. I've heard all about you, can't for the life of me figure out why they haven't apprehended you yet. But I guess if someone's gotta do it. Oh, this was bad. Oh, this couldn't be worse. Actually it could, but still. Izuku was trapped in an alley with a hero that wanted him captured and he had no way of escaping. Great. Hey now, Izuku held up his hands in front of his chest and slowly backed away from the approaching hero. I'm not looking for any trouble. I actually love your work. You could call me quite the hero fan. Hero fan or not, you're still a vigilante and need to be taken down. Conductor cracked his knuckles and charged up his fists with an attack. Izuku frantically looked around for literally any way he could get out of this. The mouth of the alley was caged off with electricity. Any dumpsters were further down. The two fire escapes were also farther down and Conductor was slowly getting closer. The only way he could think of to get out was to go through the pro. Or around. A plan formed in his head. It was a stupid one and one that may just get him captured, but he hoped desperately that it would work. He would just have to not get fried and die before he could escape. Come on kid, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The hero palmed his hands together and slowly drew them apart, a move that Izuku knew he frequently used to immobilize his opponents. If he hit him with it, then Izuku would go down and have no hope of escaping. Of course, if he was brought to Tsuki he'd probably be fine. But who's to say that even then he'd be safe? What if the detective has just been waiting for the right opportunity to take him in? Would Eraser be in on it? It is a bit suspicious that the hero hasn't tried to apprehend him himself. Stop it, Izuku. Focus now, worry later. Right? Okay. Just charge and hope that Conductor isn't as agile as he is. Izuku took off, running full speed at the static hero, thinking to himself just how stupid a plan this is. Conductor froze in shock only for a moment, but that was all that Izuku needed. He dodged the hero's stunning attack and used his momentum to run up the side of the alley wall. It wasn't as effective as he wanted it to be, but it was effective enough. He made it around the hero and booked it to the other end of the long alley. Unfortunately, Conductor was able to use his quirk at long and close range, and so to counter this, Izuku ran in a zigzag to avoid any energy beams that the hero might try to hit him with. The strategy worked ... for a bit at least. It didn't take the hero long to counter and hit him with a blast that knocked him off of his feet. Son of a. It hurt like hell, but this wasn't Izuku's first time being electrocuted. He had the burn scars on his right hand to prove that. He wasn't down for long. One perk of killing yourself over and over again is that you build up one heck of a pain tolerance, and the blast wasn't meant to stun him, just knock him down. Izuku was back on his feet, much to the surprise of Conductor, who was running towards him yelling at him to stop and give himself up. Fat chance, buddy. He kept running. Even though his legs felt like jelly that could give out any minute, even though he could smell the smoke coming from his now poofed out hair, even though he didn't have a clue how he was going to get himself out of this, he kept running. Izuku passed by a few dumpsters and a plan or more of a distraction came to him. Picking up loose trash as he ran, he began to hurl beer bottles and soda cans at the still pursuing hero. He even found a banana peel that he threw in his path, hoping that he would slip on it like in the cartoons. No such luck. And after the dumpsters came Izuku's favorite thing ... the fire escapes. Eeny meeny miny left. He cut to the left and jumped up to grab onto the bottom platform of the escape SWNG himself over the railing. Eraser would be so proud. Izuku took the stairs two at a time and made use of shortcuts when he could, but it was strong to ignore the pain in his body, and the fear that he could collapse at any time. In hindsight, a metal structure probably wasn't the best escape from someone with an electric quirk, but to be fair, Izuku wasn't in his best mindset. He hadn't made it up 3 flights before his body seized and he fell to the floor, unable to control his moments. I'll give it to you, Serpentine, you sure put up a good fight, but you're still just a child. It was foolish to believe that you could escape me. Conductor's voice came from below and he could hear the hero begin to ascend the escape stairs. Oh, that was so cool. No, stop it, Izuku. Not the time. Ugh. Come on, think. What notes do I have on Conductor? His quirk, his costume, some of the weapons that he carries and his support items. Wait, RBB gloves. Conductor wore RBB gloves because he wasn't resistant to electricity. He could just manipulate it. So while he was on this fire escape, he couldn't use his quirk to its full potential. Great, now all Izuku had to do was move. Come on, yes. It wasn't much, but Izuku had stopped seizing enough to be able to get to his feet. Now all he had to do was climb. His body was screaming at him, Conductor was screaming at him, and even Izuku was screaming at himself. What was his plan? Get to the roof and then what? It didn't matter, right now he just needed to focus on one step at a time. The hero had been very surprised when he found that Izuku wasn't where he was supposed to be, so now it was just a game of who could climb up the escape faster. Izuku had the advantage of being a few flights ahead of him, but Conductor was faster than him at the moment. Even so, he had to keep going. Come on Izuku ... come on Izuku. Please make it. Yes, oh my gosh, thank you Lord. It was like Christmas. Izuku saw the light at the end of the tunnel, or the end of the stairs at least. He finally made it ... What was he going to do now? He flopped onto the floor of the roof and took the shortest second that he could before he pushed himself back to his feet. Conductor was right behind him, so he couldn't stop. He had to keep going. Hey, oh no. The hero had made it and he looked PSS. Izuku had just been debating whether or not he thought he could make the jump to the next building when the hero's voice called out. He flinched and readied himself to make the jump. He turned back to look at the hero one last time and saw that in a moment of frustration, a mere second of miscalculation, he must have not seen that Izuku was at the edge of the roof, and he fired off a bolt of electricity heading straight for him. There was nothing that he could do. Izuku's feet were glued to where they were, and his legs refused to listen to his brain screaming at them to duck. It all happened in slow motion. The bolt came so quickly, but also so slowly, creeping menacingly, almost as if taunting him and his frozen limbs. The blue light came close and Izuku saw it illuminating his black clothes before it hit him in the middle of his chest. The attack itself wasn't enough to kill him by a long shot, but that didn't matter. He was already falling off of the roof when the hero's eyes widened in realization of what he had just done. Even if Izuku could move, he wouldn't have done anything. His chest stung. He was definitely going to have a scar when he came back. He just hoped that no one would find him before he did so. As he fell to the ground, he could see the hero leaning over the roof to watch his mistake. And then to Izuku's complete surprise, he just ... left. Izuku didn't die instantly, the fall wasn't high enough for that. So, he just laid on the concrete in an empty alley, soaking in the fact that he had just been killed by a pro hero, and he wasn't going to come for him. Conductor had left ... he abandoned Izuku. This pro hero, who was sworn to protect, had killed him and didn't even come to take responsibility for his actions. Coward. Slowly death came to take him, wrapping its cold arms around him like an unwelcomed hug. But to Izuku it was fully welcomed, an embrace that he longed for, one he wished would hold him and never let go. Unfortunately, he wasn't that lucky. Izuku woke up on the cold alley floor. It was still dark out, which didn't surprise him. He didn't think that he was gone for that long. It was quiet. Not a sound except for the occasional night-goer who passed the alley, none the wiser of the dead kid who had recited there not 2 minutes ago. Izuku didn't know what to think. He knew that heroes weren't perfect, he actually knew that better than most, but he didn't think ... how could one just? The Hero Commission was so careful about who they gave licenses to these days, so you'd think that something like this wouldn't that a hero like that. It was too much. Izuku's heart was beating 1,000,000 miles a minute and his thoughts weren't far behind. He needed to get home and sleep all of this off. Maybe he'd wake up and things would go away. Maybe when he woke up, he wouldn't have to deal with the reality that Conductor was a murderer, and that he was roaming the streets pretending otherwise. Sure, Izuku wasn't actually dead, but if it was anyone else, they would still be lying in this alley with little hope of anyone finding their body. And yeah, the hero didn't mean to kill him, but the fact of the matter was that he messed up. He didn't take in the entire situation and Izuku died because of it. And then he just walked away. That couldn't go on, Izuku wouldn't let it. The world needed people who cared about its people, not cowards who refused to take responsibility for their mistakes. Ugh. But first, Izuku really needed to sleep this off. When he got home, he took assessment of the damage and found that there was a lightning scar growing from the top center of his chest. Honestly, it looked really cool, but the story behind it would haunt him forever. No, stop it. Get some sleep. Deal with it when you wake up. I'm sure that Eraser and Tsuki will help you handle it. Oh, but what if they don't? What if they just brush it under the rug? There was nothing that Izuku could do if they decided to ignore what happened. He couldn't accuse him outright without proof, and what proof could he give if he was dead? Slowly his thoughts quickened along with his breathing until he was on the verge of an attack. Stop it, Izuku. Stop it. Eraser cares about you and you know it. He would never let someone get away with killing you. Deep breaths ... in and out ... in and out. CRPM tired. When Izuku was particularly tired, it was harder to keep his thoughts under control and he tended to go off like this. Sleep. Sleep. He plopped down on the couch, not bothering to change or put his shirt back on, and as soon as his head hit the cushion, he was out. No, stop. Izuku shot up with a scream. Another nightmare. At least tonight's was fresh and not the same old guilt or memories. His chest stung, a phantom pain from earlier, and Izuku rolled on his side with a groan. He really needed to get a better handle on himself. He picked up his phone, thankful he charged it at the hospital while he was visiting Eraser, and checked the time. 4 a.m. He got back 2 hours ago. Great. Guess he might as well go ahead to wherever he was going. There was no sense in trying to fight this if he wouldn't even get to sleep. Izuku made his way to the station after putting back on his black hoodie that smelled like a fire. Now thanks, Conductor. He would have to go shopping soon anyway. When he got there, Tsuki was sitting at his desk leaning on his hand. He looked tired, but as soon as he saw Izuku he shot up. Did the man ever sleep? If he wasn't careful he'd end up like Izuku and Eraser. Kitty met Izuku halfway and looked him over. It wouldn't surprise him if he looked a little worse for wear. He hadn't showered in a few days and was still covered in sweat from his nightmare. Not to mention his hair was still a mess from Conductor's quirk. The jerk. Yeah, I know I look like CRP, but can we talk? The detective's eyes turned serious, and he nodded, looking around and then leading Izuku down into the station. The two of them entered in what Izuku suspected to be an interrogation room, and red flags immediately went up in his head. Tsuki must have noticed because he assured him that they were alone and that all of the cameras were turned off. What's wrong? Izuku grimaced, just the thought of telling him that a hero, someone who was supposed to protect people. Ugh, it hurt his heart. He had always looked up to heroes and what they did, so the fact that something like this happened just hurt. He rubbed his wrist in desperate need to channel his nervous energy somehow. So something happened. Tell me what happened. Oh, this royally ESCK. Gosh dang, Izuku really wished he was dead right now. At least then he wouldn't have to deal with this. Although, if he was, then he wouldn't be able to call Conductor out and he would go free. No, I can do this, I have to do this. So, you know how I was out patrolling tonight? The detective nodded patiently, even though this was obviously information he already knew. Right, so I was out and as I was scanning over a few alleys I heard a fight. I went to investigate, and I saw that it was a hero who was apprehending a villain, so I tried to stay out of sight and let them do their thing. Which hero was it? Oh, that was so not what Izuku wanted Tsuki to ask, but it needed to be answered. It needed to be. He looked away, at anything but Tsukuchi's eyes that were drilling into him as he spoke. It was that hero, Conductor. This caused a look of shock to flash across the detective's expression. Conductor. But he's a daylight hero, what was he doing patrolling this late? I had the same thought, but anyway, so he finished with the villain, and he noticed me. I, true to character, tried to run, but he trapped me in the alley with him and then he started going on and on about me as a vigilante. And then he tried to capture me so that he could turn me in. I see. Well, you're obviously not captured. Tsuki states the obvious, trying to be patient as he waits for the rest of the story. Izuku clears his throat. Yeah. What happened next? Did he hurt you? The question surprised Izuku. Why would he care if the hero hurt him? 1, he was a vigilante, and 2, he was literally unkillable. It didn't make sense. So anyway, he continues, ignoring the question, he tried to capture me, but I ended up getting away and he began to chase me up to the roof of a building. And that's where Izuku pauses. Maybe you shouldn't. Izuku was a vigilante, and he was unkillable, so it wasn't like it really mattered. Serpentine. Tsukuchi's voice draws Izuku back. What happened next? What did Conductor do to you? Without even realizing it, tears began to make their way into Izuku's eyes and down his cheeks as he stared at the detective. The detective that was friends with Eraser, who laughed with both of them and who joined in with making fun of Izuku and Eraser collectively. The detective who cared enough to stay with the hero as they searched for Izuku in public records for who knew how long before he came back. When did Izuku get so fond over a cop? He killed me. He what? Izuku frantically broke eye contact with the detective, eager to be literally anywhere else but there. You know what? Never mind, it's really not that. Tsukuchi reached out and put his hand on Izuku's shoulder, causing him to stop trying to get up and leave. Serpentine, please tell me what happened. He swallowed the lump that had appeared in his throat without his knowledge. He chased me up onto the roof and I don't think he saw that I was at the edge, but he shot me with a bolt of electricity, and he saw me. Izuku, who had been previously staring at his hands on the table, looked up at the detective. He saw me dying on the ground, and he left. Oh my god. Tsukuchi sat back with his hand on his mouth. It was a lot to take in. Izuku knew that. He wouldn't have even believed it if it hadn't happened to him. I'm sorry. This caused the detective to snap his attention to Izuku. You have nothing to apologize for. I know, but no buts. You have nothing to apologize for, understand? Izuku just let out a breath. He knew that he wasn't going to be able to change his mind. Yes. Good. It's late. I'll look a bit more into this and deal with it. You should get home and in bed. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how tired you look right now. Yeah. Okay. Izuku stood up with Tsuki and nodded in thanks as he held the door open for him. And kid, he stopped in his tracks, thank you for coming to me with this. I know that it must have been strong, so just, thanks. Another nod and Izuku went on his way. He did the right thing. He had to have. Stain crept through the shadows of the building towering over him. It wasn't the plan to be tailing this specific hero, especially because he primarily patrolled during the day and Stain preferred the cover of night, but he had witnessed something last night that had caught his attention. The hero was one that he had known about. Hadn't done much of anything but had an interesting and powerful quirk. Knew how to use it well too. He wasn't too fond of what he had observed of the hero's attitude, but he had decided to leave it be for the time being. However, all of that had changed after what he saw. Stain had no idea why the hero had suddenly decided to SWCH patrols, but when he accidentally came across him, he had been fascinated and decided to investigate from the shadows. That was when he saw the kid. Some new vigilante that everyone was talking about. Honestly, he didn't think all that much about it. He was intrigued, but not enough yet to seek him out. Although apparently, he didn't need to. He watched as the young vigilante watched the hero take down a villain and try to leave only to be caught and pursued by the hero. Stain decided to follow the two of them, wanting to see how this turned out. The kid wasn't half bad. He actually did a lot better than he thought he would, and he'd be lying if he said he wasn't the slightest bit impressed. On and on he watched the game of cat and mouse go until the two of them ended up on top of a roof. Stain easily kept his distance on the roof over, but never lost sight of them for too long. That was when he watched as the new up-and-coming vigilante was hit by the hero's lightning and thrown off of the building. And then he watched as the hero just walked away. Instantly he saw red. That was not how a hero was supposed to act. All Might would never make such an amateur mistake and then ignore it as if it had never happened. No, this had to be punished. This hero had to be stopped, to be called for his crimes. Stain was disappointed in himself. That he hadn't simply ended the hero sooner like he was supposed to. If he had, then that kid wouldn't be dead. There was nothing to do about it now, however, except to avenge his young comrade. He what? Shouta, please calm down, no you cannot get up yet. Maybe telling Eraser wasn't the best decision that Tsukuchi had ever made. But he had to at some point. The kid was basically his child. He knew that he wasn't going to react well, but this was. No Shouta. Hisashi, help me hold him down. Mike shuffled to the other side of the hospital bed and pushed down on Eraser's shoulders, making sure that he couldn't get up and go kill a pro hero. Listen, we're all PSS, okay, but you're still recovering. What? Do you expect me to just sit here while a pro literally killed Serpentine? Absolutely not. Careful, Shouta, your dad is showing. Shut up. Eraser crossed his arms across his chest and glared at the two men braced to hold him down again should the need arise. Fine, so what are you going to do? I'm going to confront him. This caused Eraser to scoff as he looked at Mike like he was crazy. You're serious? Come on, Tsuki, like he'd ever tell you the truth, especially since there's no actual evidence. You forget that I'm literally a human lie detector. So what? You're just going to go up to him and ask if he killed a vigilante. Then what? Then I'm going to detain him, revoke his hero license, and let the chief figure out what to do with him. Okay, it was a good plan. Eraser couldn't deny that, but he still wanted to make him pay. Just a little bit of pummeling, not too much. But that wasn't very becoming of a pro hero according to Hisashi, stupid pacifist. Stop pouting, Shouta, it's not a good look on you. I wish I still had my bandages on. I'm sure ... and Serpentine definitely isn't your child. He's not. Keep telling yourself that. Izuku was sitting on the couch, relaxing for once in his life when he heard the sound of the door being unlocked. Alarms immediately went off in his head as he jumped up and out of the open window, quietly shutting it behind himself. What the? Nobody was supposed to be here, so why was someone trying to get into the apartment? Did that mean that they had finally sold it? If people were moving in, then what was Izuku going to do? And whoever was in there now would know that someone had been living there. Izuku poked his head up and tried to look in the window, seeing nobody at first. The door was open, and he could hear someone walking through the apartment. But he couldn't see them yet. Maybe it was just the landlord coming to check on the condition and... Oh no, this was bad. No, like this was really, really bad. Dad. It was Izuku's dad. The tall man was unmistakable, even though he had never seen him in real life before. At least, not that he remembered. But it was him, the same curly brown hair, the same dark eyes that he saw in so many pictures. But what was he doing there? He knew that he should leave, hide and try to figure out what to do. But he just couldn't take his eyes away. This was the man who had left them all those years ago and never even tried to contact them. Not even when Mom died. Nothing. And here he was, rummaging through their apartment, inspecting all of Izuku's things. He hated it. Apparently, Izuku's bad luck just kept on coming because it was at the moment that Hisashi decided to look out to the city, and the two of them made eye contact. Oh my god, mother. The window was closed so Izuku didn't hear what his father said, but he could tell by the way his mouth moved that he had said his name. He should have left, he should have just gone when he had the chance, but it was too late now and even if he wanted to, he was glued to his spot. They just stayed like that, staring at each other, until Hisashi rushed to the window and opened it with a grunt. Izuku. Oh, he wished that he could be literally anywhere else. Izuku ... son, is that you? He reached out and enveloped him in a hug that made Izuku flinch strong. He didn't seem to notice. Oh my god, what are you doing alive? I thought that you died. You and oh son, he squeezed his arms tighter, oblivious to Izuku trying to get away from this man who had infiltrated his home. Stop. His voice was low and could barely be heard. Please, let go. Oh, Izuku, you have no idea. Let me go. Hisashi froze and slowly retracted his arms from around his son. Izuku. He stumbled back, looking at this man with horror in his eyes. This was wrong, he wasn't supposed to be here. What are you doing here? Well, when I heard about everything, I decided to come here to take care of some stuff since it all fell to me. Imagine my surprise when I come to inspect your old apartment that was seeming abandoned and find my supposedly dead son. You need to leave. Right now. Hisashi leaned back and let out a small laugh. What do you mean, Izuku? I'm your father. No, this was all wrong. No, he couldn't be here, he needed to leave. Izuku needed to leave. All at once Izuku's body seemed to flip into hyperdrive and he just knew that he couldn't stay here. So, like any sane teenager, he jumped off the side of the fire escape, landing on the platform below, and booked it to the ground. His father yelled after him, but he refused to look back. He just wanted things to stop. Stop and go back. He was doing just fine on his own and now this man shows up. No, he needed to go somewhere, but where could he go? Maybe. Eraser was the only thought that broke through. Izuku didn't know why he was thinking of the hero, but he just knew that he could help. He just needed to get to Eraser and things would be okay. Shouta sat in his bed thinking. Tsuki and Hisashi had just left due to visitor hours ending and now he was here alone. He was quickly getting bored with recovering and was ready to get back out there, something that both of his friends had scolded when he brought it up. Spoil sports. They were right, of course. But that didn't mean that Shouta was just going to do nothing while his injuries healed. He needed to be productive. He knew that he would be going back to the school either tomorrow or the day after. He couldn't just abandon his teaching duties because he got a little roughed up. Hopefully that is tame enough for his friends to step off of his butt about resting. He had been deep in thought when a small pop and clatter sounded beside him, followed by the sound of the window opening and someone grunting as they climbed their way inside. As soon as the person fell to the floor with a yelp, Shouta knew who it was. He would know his number one problem child's voice anywhere. Serpentine, what are you doing here? The kid stood up and slid the window back shut, picking up the snapped-off window latch and placing it on the bedside table. He turned towards Shouta, and the hero's face immediately dropped as he looked at the kid's red eyes and tear-stained cheeks. What happened? He sniffled and tears welled up in his eyes before spilling over with a whimper. Serpentine tried to say but was cut off by a sob. Shouta sat up and beckoned the kid towards him. Hey, come here. It's okay, tell me what's wrong. He obeyed, walking closer and only slightly flinching when Shouta placed a hand on his shoulder. My dad. Your dad. I thought he was out of the picture. He was. But he just showed up and he tried to talk to me and The kid was falling apart. He was now sobbing and hyperventilating while also trying to control his breathing and failing. Under Shouta's hand his body was shaking and the tears were coming quicker than before. Eraser shifted his body to put his other hand on the kid's shoulder and shook him slightly. Hey, look at me kid, okay. Look, you're okay, you're fine. Breath with me in and out in out. Slowly he began to calm his breathing and in turn his sobs and shaking as well. Good, that's good. Feel better. Another sniffle. No, that's fair. Alright, so your dad came back and he knows that you're alive. Serpentine nodded. He was surprised when he saw me. He paused, staring at nothing in particular, before his attention snapped back, fresh tears pooling in his eyes. He didn't even show up to either of our funerals. Oh my god. Hey, you're good. You're with me, okay. That means that you're okay and you're safe. Right. He hastily nodded and ran his hands through his hair. The kid wasn't wearing his vigilante garb. He was dressed in all-might pajama brief and a too big black t-shirt. He must have come here on instinct. That also meant that his face was visible. Not that it mattered. Shouta had figured out who he was not too long ago. Izuku Midoriya. Mother and Ko Midoriya died just before Shouta met him, and the kid had died just after she did. Suicide. There was no mention of a father in his records except for a name, Hisashi Midoriya. From what he could find, he had left the family years ago and hadn't contacted them since. It hurt Shouta to see the kid like this. He had never seen him so vulnerable, so broken. Seeing his dad must have really done something to him, especially considering what he just said, that he didn't bother going to either his or his mother's funeral. Then that begs the question, why was he here now? The kid started, voice broken and soft. Can I stay here for tonight? I don't want to go home and see him again. Sure kid, whatever you need. Visiting hours were over and Shouta was pretty sure that the hospital had rules against people staying with their patients, but they also probably have rules about people breaking into the hospital rooms, and the kid had already done that twice. Plus, what were they going to do? Try to ban the dead kid? Right, I'd like to see them try. Thanks. Don't mention it. Oh my god. Shut up. You'll wake them. Hold on, I need photo evidence that this is actually happening because Shouta will never admit it otherwise. Good idea. Okay, but just be quiet you two. Whispered voices slowly broke through Izuku's consciousness. He could vaguely make out what they were saying and soon the pieces fell into place that they were talking about him. He was debating whether or not to try to pretend like he was still sleeping when a deep and groggy voice cut through the still hushed whispers. You know that I can hear you, right? At once the whispers stopped and the mood changed instantly. That's also when Izuku decided to make his presence known as well. Yeah, you guys are horrible at whispering. He opened his eyes and sat up from where he was DD across 2 hospital chairs and found that 3 familiar faces were gaping at the 2 of them with fear in their eyes. Oh, hey Shouta. Didn't know you were awake yet. I'm aware. Did you sleep well? You look like you did. I never sleep well. Izuku's snickers cut off whatever else President Mike and Ms. Joke were going to say as all eyes turned towards him. Sorry guys, he managed to get out in between laughs. No need to apologize, kid. Tsukuchi's calm voice called out and the detective walked over and sat in one of the chairs that Izuku had just been using as a bed. How did you sleep? Meh, he replied and immediately yawned after as if to sell his answer. Eraserhead scoffed, making all heads turn towards him. Yeah, that's what you get when you argue about who gets the bed. Like I was going to let you sleep anywhere but your hospital bed. You're still recovering. At this, the hero simply waved his hand in dismissal, causing Izuku and Tsuki to both sigh. So, what exactly are you doing here, kid? And without your gear. CRP. I totally forgot that I wasn't in my vigilante clothes. Well, guess it can't be helped. Oh, you know, life. 4 heads looked at each other as if trying to find any source of sense in Izuku's answer, but when they looked to Eraser he just shrugged. Right. Well, if you spent the night then how did you wait, you broke the lock again, didn't you? Tsukuchi looked over at the window that was suspiciously missing its latch, and then over to the bedside table that had a latch on it, and then back to a suddenly very quiet vigilante who was looking at the floor. Midoriya. I'm sorry Oka, hold on. How do you know my name? The kid straightened up, his voice rising. Shouta and I figured it out weeks ago. Eraser. Izuku shot a betrayed look over to the hero who shrugged under his stare. Why, and you didn't tell me? I assumed you already knew. Well, I knew that you guys were looking for it, but I didn't know you actually figured it out. It was fairly easy once we had all of the necessary information. Wow, I really can't stand you guys. Izuku stood up from his chair and stretched his arms above his head. I'm going to go use the bathroom and then hope that you all will be better when I get back. All 4 adults laughed as he left the room and tried to navigate his way to a bathroom. Once the kid left, all eyes turned to Shouta, the amusement gone from every expression. Okay, what's going on? Emmy asked since no one else seemed to be willing to break the silence. Shouta just sighed. It really wasn't his business or place to tell, but the kid was in trouble and they wanted to help. The kid's father is back. When Tsuki and I went digging into him, we found a name, Hitoshi Midoriya, but that was it. As far as we could tell, he had abandoned them when Midoriya was just a child and hadn't contacted them since. And he just decided to pop back up out of nowhere. Hisashi asked with a serious expression on his face. It was rare to see that on the pro, but it showed just how much he cared even though he had only known the kid a short amount of time. I didn't get that far, he was kinda a mess last night. All I got was that he showed up out of the blue and thought that the kid was dead. When he saw him, he tried to talk to him, but Midoriya left before he could. All faces were sad at the situation. Shouta even thought that he heard Emmy whisper a swear under her breath but decided to ignore it. Wow, that's a lot. And it doesn't help that the kid is already going through so much. I know. Like always, Shouta and Hisashi were on the same brainwave, or at least the same frequency. It had been like that ever since their first year at UA. The other 2 weren't far off either. It was then that Midoriya entered back into the melancholy room. Hey, so what happened? He stopped in his tracks as he took in the feel of the room. Are you guys okay? I think that we should be asking you that. What do you? Eraser told you. The hero had the decency to look guilty as he looked at Izuku. Sorry kid, but they just want to help. We all do. Izuku looked at each pair of eyes in the room and was confused by what he saw. Nobody had ever looked at him like that except for his mother, with eyes that said we care about you. But why? They didn't know him, and even with Eraser who did actually know him, why did he care? It wasn't like anyone had before, so what was different now? Why? The group looked at each other confusedly before Mike cleared his throat and spoke up. What do you mean, kiddo? You all barely know me, why would you want to help? Why would you even care? Why do we care? Because even though we haven't known you for long, we know that you're a good kid. A good kid who has been through a lot of CRP. It was Tsuki who answered, and that just confused Izuku more because he knew that Tsuki didn't lie. But the words that were coming from his mouth didn't make sense. How do you know that? How do you know that I'm a good kid and not just a useless waste of space who would be better off dead? Izuku hadn't meant to snap at them, but memories began to rush back of his teachers and classmates scolding him and brushing him off. Who told you that? Izuku stopped. He was ready to say something back but was caught off guard by Tsukuchi's tone. Who had told him that? Everyone. Everyone except for his mother, and she wasn't here anymore. Sure, Izuku knew that what everyone had said and done to him was wrong and that he did not deserve it. But years of being told that you were nothing tend to leave scars. Scars that never really healed all the way. He started, but the only thing that came out was a small, strangled noise as his throat closed and his eyes burned with tears. Kid, who told you that you were worthless? Another couple of tries to answer, but he just ended up opening and closing his mouth like a fish. It doesn't matter. He finally managed to get out. It absolutely does matter. Midoriya, you need to know know that that is not true. None of us think that you're useless or a waste of space, and we certainly do not think that you'd be better off dead. We've seen the good you do and your heart with those that you save. You help people and you do it well. I need you to hear this, okay? I know you. I've been working alongside you for months and I can honestly say that you are not worthless. I need you to understand that. Eraser stared at Izuku, who refused to meet his eyes. Midoriya, I need you to say that you understand. That you understand that none of us think any of that. I understand. Good. The mood in the room lifted, if only slightly. Izuku took back his spot in his chair next to Tsuki and brought his legs to his chest. Shouta, you get discharged today, right? Mike was the one to break the silence yet again. Izuku had a feeling that he was usually the one to do so in these type of situations. Eraser grunted in confirmation and Mike turned back towards Izuku. So what are you going to do, kid? What do you mean? I mean that you can't avoid your dad forever, and I'm assuming that you don't want to go back home yet. So what are you going to do? Izuku hummed in thought. It was true to going back to the apartment probably wasn't the best idea if he wanted to stay far away from Hisashi, so that meant that he would have to come up with somewhere else to stay tonight. He could always squat somewhere abandoned, but that felt too illegal. It was different when it was your own place. Regardless, he'd think of something. He would have to. Do you have anywhere else that you can possibly stay? Eraser asked Izuku, who was still deep in thought. The boy came back and shook his head, making the hero frown. But I'll figure something out. No. Izuku's head shot up from where it had been laying on his knees and he looked at Eraser questioningly. I'm not going to let a child live on the streets. You can crash at my place until you find somewhere else. This time, everyone shot shocked looks at the hero. Where had that come from? That wasn't like Eraser at all. What? No, I couldn't ask you to. You don't have a choice. You're a technically deceased minor with no legal guardian. You're staying with me. Eraser. I don't want to hear it. Wow, Shouta, who knew you could be such a dad? Hisashi, if the word dad comes out of your mouth one more time, you will be the one in this hospital bed. Present Mike fell into a fit of laughter with Ms. Joke, and Tsuki smirked at Eraser mischievously. Oh, don't be like that, Shouta. Now that the kid's staying with you, it's official. I'm serious, you guys. No more father talk for the rest of the night. Whatever you say, dad. Present Mike dodged the jab that Eraser tried to throw at him and he zipped out of the room before the hero could get up. A couple of hours later, Eraserhead was signing the discharge papers and the two of them were on their way to his apartment that Izuku had been told only a select few had ever been to. The fact didn't surprise him at all. Eraser was a private person and so it made sense that he wouldn't want too many people mixed up in his personal life, and where he lived was pretty personal. The apartment complex wasn't too far away. But it took them a while to get there because Eraser made them take a bunch of roundabout ways to shake off any potential tails. Izuku didn't think that anyone had been following them, but he wasn't about to complain. As they finally arrived at the building, Izuku was just a tad bit confused. Maybe confused wasn't the word, but just looking at the outside, he wasn't impressed. The building looked old and run down, not somewhere you'd expect a hero to live, even an underground one. Izuku didn't know much about what heroes made in terms of money, but he did know that it was a pretty decent amount. Definitely more than whatever Eraser probably paid for his place here. Thankfully, despite the rickety stairs and the few holes here and there, the actual apartment was quite nice. As they were walking down the hallway, Eraser explained that a few underground heroes lived in this complex because it was good for discreetness, and the neighbors were all good about keeping to themselves. Nobody stuck their nose in anyone else's business, and that was very appealing to pros who were trying to keep a low profile. They got to his apartment and Eraser pulled out a key and unlocked the door. Izuku had honestly been expecting a lot more locks like you saw in the movies, but that might draw too much attention. Once the door swung open and the two of them stepped inside, they were immediately rushed by two cats. One jumped onto Eraser's shoulders from the shelf next to the door and the other circled Izuku's legs, sniffing him and rubbing its head against his breath. Sorry, I should have mentioned these guys. I didn't know you had cats, Eraser. Izuku laughed as he crouched down to pet the head of the white, orange, and brown calico cat at his feet. The cat that was still on Eraser's shoulders jumped down to check Izuku out as well and soon was being pet by him as well. This one was pure black with bright green eyes. Yeah, the black one is Loki and the other one is Milo. He's pretty sweet, mostly just likes attention, but Loki ... well, let's just say that he lives up to his name. Loki's head turned towards Eraser and Izuku could have sworn that the cat narrowed his eyes at the hero almost as if he had understood him. Eraser put his keys on the rack above the shelf next to the door and made his way across the apartment with Izuku close behind. The apartment was a decent size. The entryway went straight into the living room where a long gray couch sat in the middle of the room facing a TV on a black entertainment center against the wall to Izuku's right. A matching chair was to the left of the couch, a side table to its right, and a black coffee table in front of it. Then there was the kitchen that was to the left. It wasn't too big, but it worked. There was a bar with 3 black bar stools just along the walkway that led to the hallway. So here it is. I know it's not much, but it's comfortable. I live alone, but you'll soon figure out that it's rare that I'm the only one in this place. Come on, let me show you to the guest room. He took him down the hallway. There were 2 doors on the left and 1 on the right, and then 2 folding doors that were open to reveal a washer, and dryer. That's the bathroom. He gestured to the first door on the left. That's my room. He gestured to the door on the right and then stopped and turned to the last door on the left. And this is your room for the time being. He opened the door and the two of them walked in. A queen bed with a plain gray bedspread sat against the middle of the wall to the right with two black bedside table on either side of it. In the left corner was a black desk and gray rolling chair and what Izuku assumed to be a closet next to it. And a small bookshelf sat immediately to Izuku's right. Here it is, Eraser said, sounding slightly uncomfortable. Izuku looked at everything for a moment more before turning towards the hero. You really like black and gray, huh? That brought a surprised laugh out of the hero. Why don't you take a shower and get settled? I'll go grab some clothes you can change into and then we'll talk about dinner. I'm sure Hisashi will be wanting to join us. Izuku nodded and made his way to check out the bathroom while Eraser went to get him some clothes. Honestly, this was a lot better than it could have been. Izuku didn't take anything with him when he left except for his phone, and so he was really living with only the clothes on his back. He'd have to talk to Eraser about that. He couldn't wear the pros clothes forever. For one, he would probably look ridiculous in them due to Izuku being significantly smaller than him. If he had his way, he wouldn't be returning to that apartment until his old man was long gone. But he couldn't stop his vigilante stuff, so he'd have to scrounge up a makeshift outfit to wear while he's patrolling that doesn't look absolutely ridiculous. Izuku sighed. This was going to be interesting. PFTT, oh my god, you look so cute. Present Mike stood in the doorway trying his best to hold in a laugh as he looked at Izuku standing in front of him in clothes that were very clearly not his size and wet hair that curled around his face and neck. It was all I had. Not my fault you're so small, Midoriya. Eraser said from the kitchen as he finished making himself a cup of coffee. Hey, I'm not that small. And are you just going to start calling me by my name now? Oh, can I call you by your name too? Izuku groaned and turned to sit on the couch as Present Mike broke into laughter again as he closed the door behind him. You should probably start calling Shouta by his name too. His students call him Aizawa, so you could call him that. And you can just call me Hisashi. Hisashi. Izuku threw the name back and forth in his head, but he couldn't shake off how close it was to Hisashi, and he wanted to stay as far away from the mere concept of his father as possible. Is there anything else I can call you? I could just stick with Mike. Mike frowned at Izuku as he accepted a mug from Eraser, and the two of them made their way to the living room. That's no fun, we're friends now. How about Yamada then? Izuku grimaced. That didn't sound right either. Not that there was anything wrong with his name, it just didn't feel right to call him that. We'll see. The hero scoffed and fell dramatically against the back of the couch beside Izuku, causing him and Eraser to let out a laugh as the cats jumped up to join them. Mike was dressed casually, like almost every other time he had seen him. He was in gray sweatpants and an old black band t-shirt with his blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and glasses. He honestly looked exactly like Izuku would expect from his personality. Just like how Eraser looked just like he expected him to. Black long-sleeve t-shirt, black sweatpants, black slippers, and he also sported a messy bun, although his was definitely messier than Mike's was. Izuku's was the only one who had his hair down and it was so it could air dry properly. Actually, now that he thought about it, his hair was pretty long. Maybe it was time to get it cut. The three of them ended up ordering takeout and watching a movie together. It was one Izuku hadn't ever seen, but to be fair, he had never been one to watch a lot of TV. He enjoyed it, even if he didn't understand it at some parts, but it was good, nonetheless. Mike and Eraser certainly seemed to be having fun. The two of them meshed well together. It was actually jarring. Looking at them, you'd never expect them to be so close with how opposite they are, but Izuku could tell just in the way they interacted that they truly were close. Izuku would chuckle every time Mike burst out with whatever commentary he had about what was happening on the screen, and Eraser trying to shush him before giving up and joining him in yelling at the characters on the TV. It was nice. Izuku had only ever been around his mother like this, so it was different, but it was nice. He would never admit it, but he thought that he would enjoy whatever time he had here with Eraser had. The movie ended and Mike stood up to stretch, checking his watch and groaning. Ugh, I really don't want to get up tomorrow to teach. What if I took a sick day? Do you think Nezu would believe me? Probably not. Mike rubbed his eyes with his hand and sighed. Yeah, you're probably right. I should get going then, and you better get to bed yourself, Shouta. Don't tell me what to do. Eraser deadpan as he stood up to walk his friend to the door. Izuku waved by and stood up to stretch himself as the front door closed and Eraser turned back to him. He's right though, we should be heading to bed. Tomorrow is my first official day back teaching and so I won't be around the apartment. The kid sighed. He had been thinking about his apartment and all the things there that he knew he couldn't just leave. He would have to go back there eventually and get his stuff. Might as well rip the band-aid off, right? That's fine. I have some stuff I have to do tomorrow anyway. The hero raised an eyebrow and Izuku gaped at him in response. I have a life, you know. I thought that you were dead, was all he said as he began to walk down the hallway to his room. You're not as funny as you think you are. Oh no, I'm pretty sure I'm hilarious. Good night. Izuku rolled his eyes even though Eraser was already out of sight and made his way to his own room. He had hoped that his nightmares would spare him one night in favor of him being in a new place with someone else that he wasn't used to living with. But of course, why would anything he want to happen oblige? His subconscious must have been extra PSS at him because he dreamt of his mother. Nights that he spent dreaming of her always ended with him screaming and crying for her to come back and not leave him. Tonight was no exception. Izuku saw memories of her flash in his dream until he went back through her death and seeing her the first time he died. But tonight was a little different. Usually the dream stopped there, but it kept going. Once he was sent back, he saw her again, but this time she didn't glow like an angel. She looked tired and hurt and sad. She looked at him with bloodshot, tear-stained eyes and bruised cheeks. His mother called out to him and stretched out a hand that he tried to grab but couldn't quite reach. This caused her to cry some more, but this time blood streamed down her cheeks rather than tears, and Izuku was forced to watch as his mother sobbed and blamed him for not being good enough to save her. That's when he woke up screaming. It took 2 seconds for the door to the room to burst open with a wide-eyed Eraser searching around for any type of threat. Once he assessed that there was no immediate danger, he went to Izuku, who was still sobbing and thrashing in the bed. The hero grabbed both of the boy's arms and held him against his chest in a tight hug, whispering calming words in his ear until he calmed down. It took a second, but Izuku finally stopped sobbing and fighting Eraser's tight grip. He fell slack in the hero's embrace and tried to get his breathing under control as one hand left his wrist and began to run through his hair. After a couple more minutes, Izuku was finally calmed down enough to be coherent. He sniffled and curled into himself. Sorry. Don't apologize," came Eraser's immediate response, his hand still running through his hair in a calming motion. "Do you want to talk about it?" Izuku shook his head and the hero just continued to sit with the boy, hugging and keeping him grounded. It was nice to have somebody there to help bring you back after a bad dream. He hadn't had that in so long, he forgot how much it SCK being alone. "Are you feeling any better?" This time Izuku nodded, taking careful, deep breaths. "Yeah." He sniffled. Thanks. "No problem, kid. You can go back to sleep now. I'm sorry I woke you up." "What did I just say?" "Sorry." The hero groaned, which made Izuku let out a small chuckle that he joined in on. "Look, I get it, but don't ever think that you're being a burden to me, because you're not. I took you in because I wanted to. Understand?" Izuku nodded but said nothing. If he did, he knew that he'd probably start crying again, and he was already PSS enough that Eraser had seen him crying because of his dream. "Do you think you're okay now? Are you going to try to go back to sleep?" Eraser sighed when Izuku shook his head, but it wasn't a sigh of annoyance. "Yeah, I figured. Why don't we get out and blow off some steam? I know how much you love to roof jump." That was exactly what Izuku needed. To get some fresh air and forget about everything for a while. He nodded and the hero told him that he was going to go change and grab him some clothes that he could go out in. He came back in and Izuku hadn't moved from his spot on the bed, just staring at the wall. He thanked him and changed silently before meeting him in the living room, and the two of them left. It felt great. Running across the rooftops and letting everything in his life go for just a minute, it was bliss. Izuku had let his hair remain down, so it was flowing behind him as he jumped, and he actually laughed. It was just like it had been at the start. Somehow Eraser had known exactly what he had needed. Had they become that close? Was Izuku okay with that? He had always tried to steer clear of father figures because it always brought back rotten memories of the pain his dad left behind. But he liked Eraser. He felt safe with him. And the hero seemed to like him as well, even though that part still confused Izuku. It was made clear when he had offered to let him live with him. All of the times before, Izuku could write off as him just being a hero that was trying to protect him. But someone didn't let you sleep in their hospital room and stay with them if they didn't like you. But why was the question? Izuku had asked a few times and had never gotten a clear answer. It was incredibly frustrating. Although the same could be asked about why he liked Eraser. Izuku didn't actually know why, he just knew that these past few months, despite how crappy they've been with him not being able to die and everything, have actually made him the happiest he's ever been. It's weird having someone who willingly talks to you every day and actually cares about how you're doing. And it was even weirder for him to realize that Eraser and Suki cared about him living. That took some time to get through his thick skull. He still didn't understand, but that might just be his problem. The two of them ran side by side in silence, just enjoying the fresh air and adrenaline flowing through their systems until they suddenly skirted to a stop when they heard someone scream. Just like old times. Without saying a word, the two of them went into patrol mode and went to check out what was going on. Eraser disappeared into the shadows and Izuku scoped it out from above only to have his BLD run cold when he saw who was in the alley below. Of course, Izuku would run into him again, because why would anything ever go his way? Suki said that he would take care of Conductor, but maybe he hadn't been able to yet. He had been pretty busy with Eraser in the hospital and everything. Down below, Conductor was fighting some guy who must have been bothering the woman who was crying beside the dumpster. The pro quickly took the guy out and went to comfort the victim, and Izuku found himself scowling at the scene. He was happy that the woman was safe and that the perpetrator had been stopped. But why did it have to be him? It wasn't even his patrol, so what was he doing? Izuku must have been deeper in his thoughts than he realized because he hadn't even noticed Eraser showing back up at his side, And when he finally did, he flinched. That's him, isn't it? It wasn't a question. Eraser's face wasn't in his usual scowl or unreadable expression. No, when Izuku looked at the hero he was terrified at what he saw. If he ever came across Eraser looking how he did then, he probably would have peed his breath. All he saw was pure anger on the hero's face. Tsuki must have told him what happened. That was the only explanation. Maybe we should call Tsuki. Eraser sighed beside him after a second more of glaring below and pulled out his phone. He's here, was all he said when the other end of the line picked up. Eraser told the detective exactly where they were, which Izuku had no idea about, and was about to hang up when Tsuki's voice sounded from the phone. Do not do anything stupid. I want him caught as much as you do, but nothing good will come from you acting on your emotions right now. I'm on my way. We'll get him, I promise. The hero hung up and seemed to pout as he continued to watch the scene below. The silence was uncomfortable. Izuku was usually good with silence, but this was not it. He took a second to gather whatever courage he could muster, but he ended up squeaking out a question. So, I guess that Tsuki told you. Eraser nodded stiffly and silence fell again. This was so not what Izuku was used to. He was used to seeing the cold and non-caring hero's warm side, and this was definitely not that. Izuku was glad that he was not his enemy because just one look like that from him and Izuku thought he might cry. Another few seconds passed before the hero turned his head to him stiffly. Are you okay? Izuku stared at the hero. Whatever he had expected him to say, that was not it. Yes. No, like with what happened. I can't imagine what he cut himself off and seemed to backtrack. I just want to make sure that you're okay. Yeah, I came back, didn't I? That's not. Eraser stopped and took a deep breath. No one should be as comfortable as you are with dying. You treat it like it's just something that you do and it's not. Dying is serious. Look, it's really okay. No, it is never okay. No one should ever have to go through dying over and over again. Stuff like that breaks people. Midoriya. Don't you understand that? Izuku looked the hero in the eye. They were pleading, begging him to get it. This must be something that Eraser had been wanting to talk to him about with how serious he was being, but he didn't understand. No one did, and Izuku knew that. He had accepted it a while ago. He continued to stare at the hero, and without breaking eye contact he said it. What if I'm already broken? Something flashed across Eraser's eyes and his entire face fell as he looked at Izuku's blank expression. Before he could say anything else, something happened down below and the two tore their attention from each other to see what was going on. Tsuki had arrived and had handcuffed Conductor with a pair of quirk-suppressing cuffs. The daylight hero protested and yelled at the detective as he dragged him into the cop car that was waiting at the entrance of the alleyway, but Tsuki stayed silent. He was probably doing it to protect himself, because he knew if he opened his mouth, he wouldn't be able to hold back. Two other officers came into the alley. One took care of detaining the criminal that Conductor took down and the other handled the still shaken-up victim. Once Tsuki had placed the daylight hero in his police car, he poked his head back into the alley and called out, I know you're here, Eraser. Meet me at the station and we'll question him together. Then he got in the car and drove away with the two officers not far behind. Eraser sighed beside Izuku and stood from where they had been crouched. I should go. Do you remember how to get back to the house? Yeah, I think so. Okay, I'll meet you back there when I'm finished. Please try to get some more sleep while I'm gone. Sure. And then the two of them separated and Izuku found himself on autopilot as he headed back to the apartment. He made sure to take a few of the roundabouts just in case, and then before he knew it, he was standing in front of the apartment door holding the key Eraser had given him that he found a chain for and hung around his neck in his hand. A quick turn of the key and the door handle, and Izuku was back with Loki and Milo circling his feet and rubbing their bodies against his legs. Hey guys, miss me? He knelt down to pet the two cats for a second and then he went to change out of the clothes Eraser gave him and back into the sleep clothes he had been given. He really needed to get his own clothes back. Izuku laid down in the guest room bed and stared at the ceiling trying to will himself to sleep with no success. The two cats joined him, taking their places on his chest and against his left leg respectively. The extra weight and presences helped any negative thoughts from getting far, which Izuku appreciated. About 2 hours after Izuku had laid back down, he heard the front door open and Eraser sigh as he walked through the apartment. He carefully opened the guest bedroom door, probably hoping that Izuku had been asleep, and made a face when he saw that he had not been. How did it go? We revoked his license and are detaining him for the time being. That's good. Yeah, Eraser sighed. He tried to lie and say that he had never encountered you, but of course Tsuki's quirk proved him wrong and everything kind of snowed after that. We found out a lot more questionable things about him, and so it's a good thing that he was stopped when he was. Things could have gotten a lot worse if he continued on as he was. Izuku just nodded at the hero's words as he petted Milo, who was stretched out across his chest. Do you think you'll be able to get back to sleep? A shake of the head and Eraser sighed. All right, just don't strain yourself too much, please. I'll see you in the morning. Good night. Well, Stain thought as he watched the police take Conductor away from where he had tracked him and shoved him into a car. That's going to make things a bit more difficult. It had already been enough of a pain to finally find the hero again. After that night he kept to day patrols and Stain didn't want to risk trying to take him down in broad daylight. He had finally gone back to a night patrol, why he still had no idea, and Stain was determined to call him. He had to pay for his actions. That's when he caught sight of something that made him stumble. It was the kid. The vigilante who was killed. He was there, perched on a roof beside Eraserhead, a hero that Stain was on the fence about. He was no All Might, but he was good in his own way. The underground hero cared nothing of publicity or fame or even the money from what he could tell. And therefore, Stain could not justify calling him ... yet. But how was this possible? How was the kid still alive? Did the hero know that he was not dead? And why was he here with Eraserhead? So many questions, and unfortunately, he was unable to ask any of them. The hero being taken into custody was going to be a setback, but Stain wasn't one to be easily deterred. Katsuki walked back into class for the first time since the villain attack at the USJ. The school canceled classes for the rest of the week and today was everyone's first day back. It was weird. He had heard some of what happened to their homeroom teacher and some of the other injuries that happened, and he was worried, he'd admit, but he wondered what today would look like. It would be a given that everyone would be a bit nervous considering what they had just gone through, but he didn't know if Mr. Aizawa would be coming back so soon as well. From what he had heard, he had been injured pretty badly by that creature that was there. However, when Katsuki watched as their teacher walked into the classroom with nothing to show from the attack other than some scratches and bruises that were still healing on his face, and a small scar just under his right eye, he somehow wasn't surprised at all. It seemed just like something the hero would do. Good morning, class. I hope that you all took the time that you had off to rest and recover both physically and mentally, but it's time to get back into things. Before any of you ask, I am fine, so I don't want to hear any of you worrying because I am perfectly capable of teaching. Now that that is over with, it's time that we got on with it. Everyone tensed in anticipation of what he was going to say, and when the word sports festival left his mouth, the class exploded into chaos. Katsuki found himself smirking in excitement at the thought of the event. The sports festival was something that he had watched and obsessed over ever since he was a kid dreaming of going to UA. He thought that it was so cool to see all of the students compete and watch the winner rise to the top. That's what Katsuki wanted to be like. The best, the winner. That part hadn't left him. He was still way too competitive for his own good, and he strived with everything in him to do and be the best he could. He just went about it a better way now. Something that he was very happy about. Shouts of excitement sounded all around until a stiff hand went up and Mr. Aizawa flashed his red eyes, shutting everyone up. Yes, Ada. Excuse me for saying, sir, but don't you think that it might not be the best idea to host the sports festival considering what just happened? The class representative's stern voice questioned. It was clear that a lot of the other students also felt the same way but were too scared to say anything. If I'm being honest with you, I voted against moving forward with the festival at all, but Nezu believes that we must showcase our strength by pursuing as normal, and proving that a villain attack is not enough to bring us down. I did, however, succeed with getting it pushed back a bit so that you have more time to recover and prepare. He sighed. I know that it's a lot, but you guys just survived an actual villain attack. You have the upper hand of experience, so when you go out there, I expect all of you to do your best and show everyone that Class 1 is strong. Right. Yaoyorozu stood up and pumped her fist in the air. It's time for us to prove beyond a doubt just how powerful and resilient we are. Choruses of yes and shouts in agreement broke out, and instantly everyone was pumped up about the festival. In the past, Katsuki would have been excited to prove his power and superiority over everyone, but that just wasn't his goal anymore. He didn't have to be the best, no matter how much his mother disagreed and how much he wanted to be. When he had that mindset, he hurt a lot of people. It didn't matter who they were or how he felt about them. They were in his way and someone that he had to conquer to get to the top. But that just wasn't Katsuki. He didn't want to hurt anyone anymore. Didn't mean he was going to go easy on his classmates. They were all going to bring their A game, and so Katsuki would too. Hey, Bakugo. Katsuki turned at the call of his name. The class was currently doing any extra warming up they needed to individually, and were about to come back together to begin the day's training. He had just been stretching out his shoulders when he saw Uraraka walking towards him. It took him a minute to remember that she actually talked to him sometimes, and he just kinda stared at her walking up for a second before finally answering back. What's up? Nothing much, just wanted to talk to you. I feel like we haven't spoken in forever, especially with what happened at the USJ and everything. Why would Uraraka want to talk to Katsuki? Sure, he had saved her during the entrance exam, but that didn't dictate a friendship. He paused. What were they even supposed to talk about? Yeah, how are you, doing? After everything. She joined Katsuki in doing some extra stretches as she answered, I'm okay, I guess. Still a little shaken, I saw 13 down themselves with their own quirk. It was. Uraraka looked sad as she spoke, and something twisted inside Katsuki. He didn't know why, but her being anything but her usual bubbly self just felt wrong. Yeah. Katsuki finished for her. He had seen a fair amount of action himself, and he knew that what they went through that day would stick with them, no matter how much time passed. I'm sorry you had to see that. But I just wanted to say that, you did good. Fighting, I mean. I heard from some of the other students talking how you took out some villains at the rock slide zone. The compliment felt foreign in Katsuki's mouth, but the way that her expression immediately changed from his words made him shake off the feeling. Oh, her face slowly began to redden. You heard about that. Was she getting hot already? They were in Breathe, and it wasn't the coolest day. Maybe she needed some water. Oi, do you need some water or something? I can go grab you a bottle. This seemed to redden her face even more, and Katsuki told her to hold on as he went to the cooler that was on the edge of where they were training that day. He came back and her face looked a little less red, which was good. It would be bad if she overheated during training. Thanks. Yeah. Wouldn't want you passing out on me or anything. They sat in silence as she took some gulps of water and Katsuki finished stretching out his shoulders and wrists. So, are you excited about the sports festival? He had seen her talking with some other students about the event, and she always looked so happy and determined every time she did. This time was no exception. Her eyes hardened and her grin widened as she pumped her fist in the air. Oh heck yeah. I'm so pumped, I'm going to do my best and win this thing. Katsuki accidentally let out a snort and clapped his hand over his mouth as he tried to hide his face that wouldn't stop smiling. Sorry, it was just like at the entrance exam. Uraraka was nice, but competitive, and when she set her mind to something, nothing could stop her. That much had been clear by her getting second during the entrance exam just behind Katsuki. Why are you laughing? I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna take down your little punk, but while I'm at it, you'll see. If anyone else deserved to win, it was her. Katsuki had seen how strong she worked, just in the few days that they've been here, and that much was clear. He finally got his laughing under control and met her determined stare, smiling. I'll believe it when I see it. Izuku woke up in Eraser's apartment alone. Well, as alone as someone with two cats laying across their cess could be. He picked up his phone off the dresser and looked at the time. It was just past 1 in the afternoon. He wasn't sure exactly when he fell asleep, but he must have at some point. Of course, he didn't feel any less tired and probably didn't look too great either, but that was just a given at this point. Maybe he should start walking around calling his eye bags Gucci. Get tattoos or something so that people know. Eraser would kill him, but it might just be worth it to see the look on his face. Izuku got up, regretting that he had to make the cats move when he did, and went to the kitchen to try to scrounge up something to eat. When he got there, he found a note on the bar. Good morning or afternoon if my hunch is correct. I won't be home until about 4. Feel free to help yourself to anything in the fridge and pantry, and try to not get in any trouble while I'm gone. Eraserhead. Cute. After taking inventory of what he had, Izuku settled for a bowl of cereal. To be honest, he really wasn't too hungry, but he knew that he should eat. Especially for what he was about to go do. He would need the energy. He tried to drag eating that cereal out as long as he could, but eventually he finished, and knew that it was time to face this. Maybe Hitoshi wouldn't be there and Izuku would be able to get his stuff without any hassle. It was unlikely considering his luck, but he would hold on to that hope. Surprisingly, when Izuku poked his head through the apartment window, no one was there. The place was cleaner than when he left. Hitoshi had probably cleaned or had someone else clean for him. He slipped his way into the apartment and began to search for his things. As much as he could find and carry, preferably before Hitoshi returned. Of course, that was exactly when the front door lock CLC'd. Izuku was in the middle of stuffing a trash bag with clothes when Hitoshi met his eyes. He was like a deer in the headlights, freezing at the sight of his father, who looked just as surprised as he did, but not nearly as annoyed as he felt. Kill me now. What are you doing? Nothing. It doesn't look like nothing. You know what, I don't think it's really any of your business what I do. So, let me just finish up here and I'll be on my way. Now hold on a minute. Izuku flinched and froze when Hitoshi grabbed his wrist. Let go. Hitoshi scoffed. Izuku, honestly, I am your father. Something must have broken through because suddenly Izuku could feel his body again, and he snatched his wrist out of the man's grip and took a few steps back. Can we please just stop with this childish behavior? It's beneath you. Hitoshi made no other move towards Izuku and Izuku refused to acknowledge him. So, without looking or speaking to him, he continued gathering his things into his trash bag, pretending that the man wasn't there, gawking at him. Oh, honestly, this is ridiculous. I am your father. I deserve more respect than this. A scoff was the only reply Izuku gave, and it was clear that Hitoshi was quickly losing his temper at his son's nonchalant reaction to his presence. He must have imagined it, but he could have sworn that he felt the room become just the tiniest bit warmer, and that he smelled the faint smell of smoke wafting through the air. Izuku, I refuse to allow you to act this way. You are to respect and obey me. It was a mistake, it really was, but Izuku couldn't hold back the laugh that escaped him. Yeah, no. Excuse me. No. He whipped around, glaring at his father, who instinctively took a step back at his son's gaze. You don't get to do that. You don't get to just walk back into my life and try to be a parent. I am your father and fathers are here. He couldn't help it. All of the pent-up feelings from when he was little, watching his mom try to be brave and strong for Izuku even though she was breaking inside from the loss of her husband so suddenly. All of the anger of him not being there for either of them. All of the rage and disappointment when he didn't show up to either of their funerals and only came back to claim whatever they had left behind. Fathers love their children and protect them. They provide for them and support them. They raise them. You weren't here and you do not get to just show up now. I understand your frustration, but I will not tolerate this behavior. I am your father regardless, and as such I deserve to be respected. Stop. What? Just stop. He hated himself. He hated that he came back here and put himself in this situation. He hated that even though he hated the guy, he still deep down wanted that presence of a father. And he hated that the man who hadn't loved him enough to stay was dragging his tears out of him no matter how much he tried to push them down. Izuku, you left. His voice cracked at the outburst. You left me. You left Mom. And you sure as hell do not get to come waltzing back now as if nothing happened. That is no way to speak to your father. Oh my god, shut up, you are not my father. Hisashi took another step back as he watched his son break down and lash out in front of him. You left me. You left us alone. You walked away. How could you do that? How could you do that to your own family? Izuku took in a shaky breath as the tears spilled down his cheeks and Hisashi stared at him wide-eyed. He steadied himself. You left ... all I ever wanted was for someone to stay. For someone to love me despite something that I had absolutely zero control over. Do you have any idea what it was like? Growing up hated and mocked for being different. Having a constant reminder that not even my father loved me enough to stay. You're just like everyone else. Well, guess what? I don't need you anymore actually, I never did. Hisashi didn't say anything else and neither did Izuku. He wanted nothing to do with this man anymore. He never wanted to see him ever again and he would make sure that he didn't. He finished grabbing his things and then walked out of the front door without a word. He didn't care if anyone recognized him. None of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was getting home to Eraser before he did something he regretted. Izuku didn't know what time it was when he got back. His phone had died halfway to his apartment, so he made sure to grab his charger so that he would be able to charge it when he got back. As he approached the door he heard muffled voices behind it, which probably meant that Mike was over again. When he entered the apartment, like always, he was greeted by two cats that were very excited to see him and two heads whipped around to where he was standing in the doorway. Kid. Eraser rushed over and took in Izuku's probably atrocious appearance. What happened, are you okay? Mike wasn't far behind him and started to check Izuku over for any kind of visible injury that he might have. Izuku stepped forward to close the door and shook off Mike. I'm not hurt, and it was nothing. Don't worry about it. He tried to head to the guest room, but the two pro heroes blocked his path, both wearing very different expressions of worry. Absolutely not. You've been crying, tell me what happened. It's not important, just leave me alone, okay? Izuku. Eraser took a step forward and grabbed both of his shoulders, staring into his eyes. Kid, you're shaking. Please, just tell me what's going on. He decided to ignore the surprise of Eraser using his first name in favor of focusing all of his energy on trying to not cry again. Another hand fell on his shoulder, and he met present Mike's concerned eyes. Please ... we care about you and just want to help. Looking between the two pros standing in front of him, Izuku wanted nothing more than to spill everything to them. But could he do that? What if they left just like everybody else? What if? He looked at them again. No, they were here, and they would remain here no matter what. He was sure of it. Without warning, Izuku's legs gave out and the two heroes followed him to the floor, two sets of arms wrapping around him as he sobbed and sobbed, letting out everything. All of the sorrow, and rage, and regret, and betrayal that he had been holding onto for so long. He sat there in between the two of them blubbering and wailing as they held onto him firmly, reassuring him that they weren't going anywhere. It was strange. Somehow, Izuku didn't feel uncomfortable wrapped in their arms. He didn't freeze or flinch at their touch, but rather he leaned into it and clung to the comfort that it brought for dear life. And they just sat like that. He wasn't sure exactly how long they let him sob between them. It could have been hours, but he was exhausted by the time that he finally calmed down and leaned into Eraser's chest, sniffling as Mike rubbed his back. It was another few minutes before anyone said anything. Do you want to talk about it? Mike asked softly beside him. Izuku sniffled again and rubbed at the moisture in his eyes. You don't have to, but we're here. Eraser quickly added on when Izuku hesitated. And no, it's fine. His voice was hoarse from how strong he sobbed, but he knew that he needed to tell them. He couldn't keep doing this alone. He would unravel at the seams if he continued to try. I went back to my apartment to get all of my stuff that I left behind. Your stuff? Izuku raised a shaky hand to point at the trash bag that sat beside the door. He must have dropped it at some point, but he honestly didn't remember. When I was gathering everything, he showed up. He is in ... you father. It wasn't a question. Izuku flinched at the word. Both heroes decided to ignore the reaction. It was weird. Eraser somehow always seemed to know exactly how to read him. We got in an argument. I think that I made my point, and I don't think that he'll be trying to reach out to me again. While Mike breathed beside him and the two heroes glanced at each other before looking back at Izuku. That must have been strong. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. Izuku shrugged. It was bound to happen at some point. He dropped out mid-sentence, and no one questioned him on it. They both seemed to have picked up on the sensitivity of the topic. I'm just glad that I got it over with and got my stuff back. It was embarrassing having to wear your hobo clothes. He chanced to smirk at Eraser, who looked scandalized. You are literally in my house right now. It's actually an apartment, Shouta. Mike corrected and winked at Izuku as Eraser seethed at the two of them. Izuku let out a weak laugh before his expression turned serious again. In all seriousness, I'm pretty sure that I needed that. I didn't realize how many pent-up emotions I had towards him, and it felt good to finally let all of it out. Yeah, dads can be like that. Mike shot a pointed look at Eraser, who just shrugged. My dad walked out on my mom and I too. It was rough, but we managed. Izuku's head shot up as he looked at Eraser in shock. I didn't know that. You never asked. Gotta love daddy issues, I guess, Izuku joked with a snicker, making both of the heroes break down in laughter. Oh, but Shout is a dad too, so does that still count? Hizashi, Eraser cried out as Izuku and Mike high-fived. Things weren't perfect. He doubted that they ever would be. Pain like that doesn't just go away, but maybe he would be able to start to heal now. He looked at the two heroes still by his side and couldn't help but smile. Yeah, healing would be nice. Izuku needed a change. He needed something to be different so that he could put all of what happened behind him. It sounded crazy, but somehow, he just knew that's what he needed. A physical representation of him moving on. He continued to stare at himself in the mirror of the guest bathroom. Eraser and Mike were at school, and so Izuku could really do whatever he wanted while they were gone. Although, why they trusted him in Eraser's apartment alone, he had no idea. Maybe that was just a show of how far Eraser and him had come from when they first met. He hummed as he was going through all of the possibilities of what he could do. He could get a piercing, that might be fun. He already knew he was going to cut his hair, as much as he loved matching Eraser and Mike with their man buns. It was getting really long and he had a particular style he had been dying to try out. Dyeing his hair was out of the question. It seems like a lifetime ago that Izuku had seriously considered coloring his hair just so he wouldn't have to look at himself and be reminded of his mother. But now that's all he wanted. He actively searched for her in everything, and it always warmed his heart whenever he did. He had done some research about different places in the area, and it just so happened that there was a highly rated salon and barbershop in the mall right next to a piercing shop and a tattoo place. It was like they wanted people to make stupid and impulsive decisions all at one time. But hey, gotta respect the hustle. If he went ahead to the mall and started with his hair, he could decide if he wanted to do anything else, but he thought that he might hold off depending on how his cut goes. He still had some money, and he was going to talk to Eraser soon about getting a job. Hopefully the hero would help. You wouldn't believe how bad the job market is for dead people. It didn't take him long to get to the mall. It was a big one, 3 stories tall and packed despite it being a school day. Izuku consulted the mall map and quickly memorized exactly where he needed to go and how to get there. He also kept note of the shops around just in case. Alright honey, what are we thinking today? The hairstylist turned Izuku around in the styling chair and the two of them looked at him in the mirror at the counter. Izuku moved his head in order to properly see all of his hair. Well, an hour later the stylist was finished and admiring her handiwork. Oh yeah, I think that this is some of my best work. Wanna take a look? Izuku nodded excitedly and found himself looking at a completely different person. It was someone that he had never been before, and he loved it. It was exactly what he wanted. What used to be curly locks that fell just above his shoulders were now shaped into an undercut showcasing the best of Izuku's curls on top of his head. The sides weren't buzzed all that short, and the top fell just over his eyebrows and perfectly covered his bullet scars, something that he specifically requested. The stylist had asked about them, just trying to make small talk, and Izuku had fed her some BS story about how he bumped his head as a child, and she seemed to buy it easily. As he admired his new cut, he noticed that people all around the store kept on looking at him. Did it look that good or did he look that weird? It was strong to tell sometimes. Although, the smile from the stylist made him think it was the former. He paid for his cut and walked out of the shop feeling like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Well, it had. But you know what he meant. Izuku decided to stick with just the cut. It was a big change, and he was afraid that Eraser might go into cardiac arrest if he showed up with anything else. Mike, he knew, would be supportive all the way. Actually, Izuku would bet that if he asked, he would come with him next time and convince him to get a tattoo or something. Mike was fun like that. As he entered the apartment building, he glanced at his watch and determined that the two of them should already be back by now unless they needed to stay for some reason. He hoped that they hadn't. The sooner they saw him the better. Turning the lock, he heard the two heroes chatting in the common area and smiled to himself. He opened the door and watched as two heads turned towards him. One dropped, and one looked so excited that he might explode. Surprise. Mike jumped up from where he sat on the couch and bounced towards Izuku. Oh my god Izuku, you look so good. Oh, doesn't he look great, Shouta? Mike observed his hair from all angles and tested the texture of his curls, which he must have been happy about because his smile got even wider than it had already been. Eraser slowly stood up, still staring at Izuku. Wow. Yeah, I thought that it was time for a change, you know. Do you like it? Suddenly, the hero's expression turned surprised and then softened into a small smile. Of course I like it. Sorry, it just took me a minute to adjust, but yeah, you look great, kid. Thanks, Eraser. Izuku could feel his face redden at the fresh wave of compliments the two heroes gave him. He wasn't used to being praised so much. It felt nice. Nice to be loved and appreciated. Going out that night with his new hair had been interesting. He was so used to having it pulled back into a ponytail or bun. But he didn't have to deal with that anymore, and it just felt so weird to not have that weight on his head as he ran. In the back of his mind a voice popped up worrying how his curls would look after dealing with the wind and humidity and Izuku jumping and running all around. But he quickly shushed the voice and went back to enjoying his nightly roof jumping. Eraser hadn't come with him tonight, only because Mike threatened to literally tie him up and sit on him to keep him from overexerting himself so soon after his release from the hospital. He wasn't happy about it and pouted the entire time Izuku got ready and left, but he wasn't worried. It was strong to be bored or stay upset around Mike. Eraser would be fine. The night was fairly quiet, which sussed Izuku out just a bit. The fact that he had only taken down 2 criminals so far didn't seem right, but maybe that was just him being paranoid. Half an hour later he still hadn't come across any disturbances and was now officially sketched out. So, you can imagine his surprise when he found his new friend being threatened in an alleyway. Again, Izuku zipped down to the ground and barreled into whoever was messing with his friend, earning a tiny little leap from his as he watched. Serpentine, what are you doing here? He got up from where he had landed on the criminal and stumbled over to Shinso. The better question is, why do you keep finding yourself in these kind of situations? How am I supposed to be your friend if you die? It was ironic, and if Shinso knew just how ironic what he was saying was, he'd be on the floor laughing ... or hitting him. He hadn't really found out what kind of friend he was yet, so it could really go either way. First of all, it's not my fault. People must just look at me and assume that I'm good prey or something. And second of all, rude. Oh, whatever. Also, since when are we friends? Izuku looked at Shinso. The question didn't sound upset at the idea of being friends, just confused maybe. Since I saved your life the first time. That's a bit dramatic. I would have been fine. Right? And I care about my safety and well-being. Izuku lightly punched Shinso's shoulder and let out a snort. You're a hoot, Shinso. He started but dropped off in favor of just looking at Izuku, very confused and concerned. Anyway, what are you doing right now? Going home. It seemed a little too late to just be getting home, but Izuku wasn't about to question the boy's hobbies after school, so he just let it go. Do you want to hang out? Shinso sputtered before pulling himself together and asking, aren't you like, on duty or something? Not technically. Since I'm a vigilante I can do pretty much whatever I want. I just so happen to enjoy patrolling and kicking bad guy butt. But tonight's been really boring and I'm literally starving. Izuku whined as he dramatically leaned against a dumpster. Hitoshi rolled his eyes at the vigilante. The first time they had met was weird, but he didn't know how to navigate this. He had never actually had a friend, so he didn't know if Serpentine had been joking or not about them being friends. Was this how you make friends? Do you just save them and then adopt them? It seemed strange, but honestly, he wasn't in any position to say no. For as little as the two of them knew each other, the vigilante had already been the nicest person that Hitoshi had ever met. Okay then, where do you want to eat? If he was going to go along with this, then he might as well just give it his all. Serpentine shot up and Hitoshi could just tell that he was smiling under his mask. I was feeling some ramen. Sounds like a plan. But are you going in your vigilante suit? Izuku looked down and silently cursed to himself. He could go like this, but then he would have to take off his mask to eat and then people could see his face, and that would just be a whole mess. He looked back to Shinso and debated whether or not he trusted him enough to go out in regular clothes with him. It wasn't like the two of them actually knew each other, but honestly, what was he going to do? Try to out a dead person? Good luck with that. Could I use your bag? He pointed to the backpack Shinso was wearing. Sure. He handed it over and Izuku began to strip off some of his gear in order to look less like Serpentine. Off went the mask, the utility belt, the pipes, the knife, and anything else he had in his pockets that were vigilante-related. Luckily tonight he opted for sweatpants instead of his usual tight joggers and he wore his usual black hoodie. Once he was finished, he zipped up the bag and handed it back to a tired-eyed Shinso that seemed to be trying to hide his surprise at seeing Izuku without his mask. It wasn't like the mask covered all that much of Serpentine's face, just his nose and below, but still. When he took off the mask and shoved it into Hitoshi's bag, he couldn't help but gape. He quickly reset his face and just opted for pretending like he didn't care, but he knew that the vigilante saw right through him. When he first saw the vigilante, his green hair and eyes would have been something forgettable, but the way he held himself made them so interesting. His long hair now short, Hitoshi had to do a double take when he first saw it flowed easily into a bun at the back of his head and the little pieces framed his face in an almost gentle way. All of that went away, however, when you got to his eyes. Those eyes that seemed to glow green in the night. Eyes that saw right through anything you tried to throw out to distract from the truth. Those eyes that had so much pain in them that Shinso sensed hurt every time he looked into them for too long. Of course, that all just added to the way he seemed to radiate strength. It wasn't a CCKY sort of thing that dominated any space he was in. But it was more like waves slowly overtaking you and then before you know it, he's already taken you down. His nonchalant attitude and sarcastic tongue all helped to tie in his vigilante persona. He pulled the mask off and Hitoshi found himself surprised at the bottom half of the vigilante's face. It was so soft. A kind face that could warm up any room and bring light to the darkest places. Very different from the Serpentine he knew. The thing that really stuck out to him were the freckles that ran across his cheeks and bridge of his nose and seemed to dominate his face. If Shinso didn't know any better, he'd say that the vigilante was almost pretty. He valued his life, however, so he'd never say it to the guy. Izuku glanced up and noticed that Shinso was still looking at him. Do you have a problem? he asked the boy who flinched at his voice. What? Oh, no. No, it's just that I didn't take you as someone who would have so many freckles. He shrugged. I get it from my mom. And then the two boys were off to go chow down on some ramen. Oh, and by the way, he continued after walking for a minute, don't even try to figure out my identity because you won't. Shinso stared at him wide-eyed. W wasn't planning on it. He stuttered out and quickly broke eye contact. Izuku tried to hide his smirk. He wasn't used to people being intimidated by him, so this was definitely new to him. But he had to admit that it was pretty funny. It wasn't long after that they arrived at the ramen shop and began stuffing their faces. Izuku was mid-chew when Shinso cleared his throat and asked him a question. So, we're friends now, right? When do I get to know what your actual name is? That seems like a thing that friends should know. Izuku stared at him with his mouth full and ramen hanging from his lips. Quickly he finished chewing and swallowed before raising an eyebrow at a patient Shinso across from him. Is that so? Well, I guess I wouldn't really know. Me neither, I'm just taking a guess honestly. The two boys stared at each other, both with sympathy in their eyes for the other and the smallest hint of sadness for themselves. It was messed up, but Izuku found a sort of comfort in the fact that he wasn't alone in being alone. He took another bite, slurping the hanging ramen into his mouth. Well, I guess if we can joke about our trauma with each other, then you ought to at least know my name. You can call me Midoriya. Shinso's slight smile fell, and his eyebrows rose. He looked suspicious, but of what? Izuku didn't know. You're joking. What? No, I'm not. That's actually my name. He didn't seem convinced. There's no way. Why do you seem so against this? Is there something wrong with my name? He tried to swallow back his laugh but failed and looked back at Izuku. You're telling me that your name means green. Seriously, that seems kinda on the nose, don't you think? Realization dawned on Izuku. His mother had talked to him about his name one time, and he had researched it himself, but for whatever reason it just didn't seem to faze him how much irony there was. Oh, he could feel the BLD rush to his cheeks. Yeah. I guess I can see how you'd think I was lying, but that really is my name. That's amazing. Shinso leaned back in his chair and picked his bowl back up. Izuku allowed a small smile to form on his face. Was this what an actual friend was? Someone that joked without the intent to hurt? It didn't seem real to him. He shoved some more ramen in his mouth and allowed himself another quick scan of the restaurant. It was something he had been doing ever since they walked up to the building. When you hung around a racer for long enough, you started to pick up on his habits and paranoia. Every look around had seemed fine. He knew where all of the entrances and exits were, and he had a rough estimate exactly how long it would take him to get there. No one had struck him as someone to worry about, but he made sure to keep an eye out and keep his senses open. He also had multiple plans of escape if the situation called for it. It was probably him being too cautious, but it was better to be safe than sorry, and it was at that exact moment that he and Katsuki Bakugo made eye contact, and then everything descended into chaos.